The Declaration of 2026, Audio Edition. The Declaration of 2026 is a political nonfiction book written, edited, and published by David Allen. Dedication. This book is dedicated to all who have served, to those who gave their lives, and to those who stood willing to do so in defense of a nation and our freedom, liberty, and justice for all. If a generation is measured at 25 years, this is the 10th generation of our nation. Since 1776, approximately 700 million people have lived in, or continue to live in, the United States. More than 42 million Americans have served in the armed forces since the Revolutionary Army first took its stand. Over 1.3 million have given their lives in service to this country and the cause of freedom. It is also dedicated to the American people, including first responders, teachers, government employees, and everyday men and women who work hard each day to support their families, strengthen their communities, and keep this nation moving forward. It is dedicated not only to past generations, but also to this generation. It is dedicated to the people who will inherit this nation. May they be given something to be proud of, a government that belongs to the people, answers to the people, and reflects the best interests of the people. It is dedicated to the people of the world who live without freedom and struggle each day with governments that do not put their people first, and to those who continue to fight for freedom. Freedom is not only an American right, but a human right. This book is dedicated to family, both personal and national. May there always be a commitment to one another and a remembrance that we all are part of the American family, united as the children of liberty. Table of Contents. The following is a list of chapters included in this audiobook. Chapter 1, Common Sense 2026. Chapter 2, American Crisis 2026. Chapter 3, The American People. Chapter 4, The American Experiment. Chapter 5, The Washington Machine. Chapter 6, The Washington Cartel. Chapter 7, The 1%. Chapter 8, The Power of the 99%. Chapter 9, The American Restoration. Chapter 10, The Articles of Constitutional Restoration. Chapter 11, The Declaration of Restoration. Chapter 12, A New Call to Serve. Chapter 13, The Road We Choose Together. Introduction. There comes a point when people begin to feel that something is not right, not because someone told them or because they read it somewhere, but because they begin to see it in their everyday lives. They experience it in ways that can no longer be ignored. It shows up in the cost of living, in the stress of trying to keep up, and in the growing frustration that things are not working the way they once did. For a long time, many of us believed these problems were individual, something we needed to fix on our own by working harder, spending less, or making better decisions. Over time, it becomes clear that millions of people are experiencing the same struggles. When that happens, it is no longer personal, it is something much bigger. At the same time, something else has been happening across the country that is just as important as the financial pressure people are feeling, the growing division between us. People who once lived, worked, and got along with one another now find themselves on opposite sides of almost everything. Conversations that once brought understanding now turn into arguments that create distance, even among friends and family members. Differences that should be part of a healthy system have turned into lines that separate people. It has reached a point where it feels like we are no longer looking at the same reality. That kind of division makes it difficult to solve any problem because when people are divided, they stop working together. And when they do, progress slows. The United States was built on the idea that people could come together, even with different opinions, and govern themselves in a way that allowed the country to move forward. It was never about everyone agreeing on everything, and it was never meant to be perfect. It was designed so that people could find common ground and work toward a shared future. This book is about stepping back and taking a clear look at where we are today, not from a place of anger or blame, but from a place of understanding. It looks at how our government works, how it has changed over time, and how the system designed to serve the people has become increasingly difficult to see and understand. It is about recognizing the difference between what our founders intended and what exists today, and why that difference matters in our everyday lives. The goal is not to tear down, but to understand and to restore it. At the center of everything in this book is a simple idea that has always been part of this country: common sense. Common sense tells us that when something is not working, it needs to be fixed. It tells us that when millions of people are experiencing the same problems at the same time, there is a reason for it. It tells us that division weakens us while unity makes us stronger. It reminds us that government does not exist to govern the people, but to serve the people. That idea has not changed, even if the system around it has become more complicated over time. The purpose of this book is not to create more division or to point fingers at one group or another, but to bring clarity to what many people are already feeling. It is meant to help people step back, see the bigger picture, and understand their role as citizens. Once that understanding begins to return, everything else starts to make more sense. The system we have today has not changed overnight, and it will not be corrected overnight. But it can be corrected when people understand how it works and choose to stay involved. This is not about going backward or trying to return to a different time. It is about moving forward in a better direction with a better understanding of what needs to change and what needs to stay the same. The ideas in this book are not complicated or new, but they are often overlooked because life has become so busy and distracting. Once people take the time to connect those ideas and see how they fit together, the path forward becomes easier to understand. In the end, the future of this country will not be decided by a small group of people, but by millions who choose to stay involved, pay attention, and take responsibility for what belongs to them: our government. That responsibility has always been part of the American experiment of self-government, and it remains just as important today as it was when this country began. This book is simply a starting point for understanding that responsibility and recognizing the role each of us plays in the direction our nation takes from here. Chapter 1, Common Sense 2026. When people living together under one nation realize that they share far more in common than anything that divides them, something powerful begins to happen. They start thinking with common sense again. They see that the government overseeing their lives is not an authority above them, but a government that belongs to them. They remember that a free government exists only through the consent of its people, because it is meant to be of the people, by the people, and for the people. Once this understanding returns, the people reclaim the simple truth that they are the rightful owners of their government. They awaken with a unified purpose. They rise together, not in anger, but in strength, to reclaim the government that has always belonged to them. Thomas Paine might say these words today if he could see what has happened to America. Long ago, even before cities appeared and state lines were drawn, people from the original colonies shared our same worries. Their world was smaller, roads were rougher, and winters were colder, but the uncertainty they faced was not so different from what people feel now. It was 1776, and the colonies along the Atlantic coast were full of people taxed without representation. They were bound by laws they never wrote and ruled by a king they had never seen. They worked the fields, shops, and docks of a growing land, while decisions shaping their future were made across an ocean by leaders who would never know their names. Into that world came a man who did not look like a hero, who did not command an army or inherit a fortune. Thomas Paine arrived in America with little more than a restless mind and a deep frustration with injustice. He was familiar with struggle. He had tasted failure, poverty, and disappointment. He knew what it felt like to live in a world where powerful men insisted the system was working, while ordinary people carried the weight of those laws and the system. When Paine looked at the colonies, he did not see helpless people. He saw a population that had forgotten its own strength, a nation waiting to learn its own identity. He saw people who had grown so used to obstacles that they no longer questioned why they existed. Paine understood that people do not rise when they are told to rise. They rise when they understand why they must. So Paine sat at his writing desk and began crafting words that could travel farther than any voice. Words that could reach kitchen tables, barns, workshops, taverns, and soldiers' tents in a country not yet born. He wrote plainly because truth does not need explanation. He wrote to the hearts and minds of everyday people who were living under an unjust system. He wrote with one purpose: to remind every man and woman that the right to self-government belonged to them as naturally as breath belongs to the living. Families read Thomas Paine's words aloud by firelight. Soldiers tucked them into their coats as they marched. Farmers repeated them between fence posts. Women repeated them in conversations, even though it was not allowed at the time. Paine did not give the people new ideas. He gave them back the ideas they had abandoned. He gave them the courage to recognize their own power. Our lives today do not resemble the 18th century in appearance, but they resemble it in feeling. The buildings are taller, the roads are smoother, and information travels faster than any rider on horseback could have imagined. A distant king does not rule us, but many feel governed by systems that seem just as far from their daily lives. People vote, work, pay taxes, and raise families, but decisions that shape our futures often feel out of reach. Freedom remains, but the closeness between the people and those who govern us feels more distant than it once did. For a long time, many families believed that the financial strain they felt was their own burden to carry. A higher grocery bill could be explained. Rising rent prices could be managed. An increase in insurance costs could be absorbed with sacrifice. People told themselves that the world was changing and that they needed to adjust. We worked longer hours, delayed vacations, postponed plans, tightened budgets, and pushed forward, because that is what responsible people do. But when the adjustments never seem to end, common sense begins to speak. When food, fuel, housing, healthcare, and other basic costs rise simultaneously while wages struggle to keep pace, the pressure is no longer temporary. It becomes a pattern. When millions of households experience that pattern at once, it stops being personal and starts being structural. A family that works hard should feel more secure over time, not less. A worker who gains experience should see progress, not stand still. A young couple saving for a home should see the goalpost move closer, not drift further away. It does not make sense for a nation built on courage to produce insecurity for those who work hard every day to survive. To celebrate corporate growth while families struggle and tighten their budgets. For the government of a free nation to leave its people feeling forgotten and alone. These are not angry conclusions. They are logical ones. They are the kinds of conclusions ordinary people reach when they compare what they were promised to what they are living. At the same time, political life has grown louder. Campaigns stretch longer and advertisements fill the screens. Promises are repeated with confidence, but many people struggle to see a clear change in their daily lives. The same issues return year after year, and the same concerns remain unresolved. Campaigns require large sums of money, and those who provide it remain close to the campaign. They often expect something in return. Those who vote appear for a moment and then return to their daily responsibilities. When people see that fundraising dominates election cycles, they begin to ask who benefits most from that system. When they see that laws are written in language that ordinary people find difficult to understand, They begin to ask why those laws are so hard to read. When they observe that decisions affecting millions are shaped by small groups that operate full-time within government, they begin to ask questions. When rising costs, political distance, and constant noise happen together, the result is confusion. Confusion weakens trust, and trust weakens unity, and unity is essential in a republic. A free nation depends on people who believe their efforts matter and that their voices carry weight. When that belief begins to fade, people need something to bring it back. Common sense is that something. It is not loud and it does not shout. It compares what people see to what they were told. It asks whether those things match and whether the structure still reflects the people who own and sustain it. It asks whether the promise of self-government is still alive in daily life. In 1776, it made no sense for an island to rule a continent. The logic was simple, and once it was spoken clearly, it could not be ignored. Today, the logic is different, but equally clear. It makes no sense for systems funded by the people to drift so far from the people. It makes no sense to favor the wealthy rather than the people. It does not make sense to shield decisions from the people who live with their consequences. This is not a call for destruction. It is a call for reconstruction. This is not a rejection of the government. It is our responsibility. The right to self-government was not granted once and forgotten. It is renewed by people who pay attention, ask questions, and remain engaged. When people remember that authority belongs to them, they begin to feel less powerless and more responsible. Common sense. 2026 begins with a shared recognition. It begins when people see that their struggles are shared. It begins when they admit that something feels out of balance. It begins when they decide that the answer is repair and correction. Renewal does not require chaos. It requires clarity. It requires steady hands and a steady voice. It begins when millions recognize the same truth. Many people were raised to believe that the path was simple. Work hard, stay honest, pay your taxes, raise a family well, save when possible, and vote when it is time. That path was never perfect, but it felt possible. There was a sense that effort and reward were connected. A worker who stayed loyal to a company could expect stability. A small business owner who built a good reputation could expect growth. A young couple saving each month could expect that home ownership was within reach. Today, that connection feels weaker for many families. The same concern appears in political life. People vote, they listen to debates, and they hear promises about working families and fair opportunities. But election after election, many of the same problems remain. Campaigns grow more expensive, advertising becomes more intense, and fundraising totals are reported like scores in a contest. People begin to ask whether the ability to raise money matters more than the ability to represent them. They notice that those who remain inside government full-time often shape policy before it ever reaches public discussion. This is an age where news travels instantly, and every hour brings a new controversy. Every day introduces a new reason to feel unsettled. Strong emotions spread quickly because they hold attention. The result is a steady stream of conflict that can make the country feel permanently divided. When people speak with their neighbors, they often find that they share the same basic hopes for stability, fairness, and opportunity. The founders understood that power could accumulate when it is not watched or examined. They built checks and balances because they knew that power shifts over time. That shift does not make a nation evil or broken. It makes a nation human. The strength of a republic lies in its ability to correct itself without violence. That correction begins when people recognize shared problems and refuse to ignore them. Responsibility requires participation. A free nation depends on people who remain involved beyond election day. Voting matters, but so does attention between elections. Learning how laws are written matters. Understanding how budgets are set matters. Asking representatives direct questions matters. These actions are not dramatic, but they are powerful when practiced. All Americans have common sense. The problem is we do not always use it. Everyone loves sugar, and many people know that sugar is not good for us. However, we all enjoy sweet tea, cakes, ice cream, and desserts. Even though common sense tells us not to eat these, we do it anyway. That is what is happening today. We all see what is happening, but it is just easier to do nothing. Then over time, the problems get worse and more complicated. The issues are starting to affect our lives, our families, and our bank accounts. Common sense tells us we need to do something, but just like sugar, we are not listening to our common sense. Common sense is when the American people realize that we are the owners of our government. We, the people, hold the authority to elect those who run the government, and we, the people, not those elected, are the ones who hold the power. Common sense is when people realize that united we stand and divided we fall. Not as Democrats, Republicans, or independents, but as Americans. Common sense is when people take back their government from special interests, multinational corporations, and the 1% who have taken it from us. Chapter 2, American Crisis, 2026. The morning of September 18, 1873, began like any other day with people going to work, stores opening, and the country moving forward without any clear sign that anything was about to change. On the surface, everything appeared stable. Railroads were expanding across the nation, businesses were growing, and money was flowing through the economy in a manner that felt dependable to those living in it. There was a sense that progress would continue, that the system was functioning, and that the future would look much like the present. That's why very few people saw any reason to question what was happening around them. Beneath the surface, the system was already starting to weaken in ways that weren't obvious. Companies borrowed large amounts of money to grow faster than they could sustainably manage. Investors kept providing that money, expecting continued growth. Banks supported that expansion by trusting everything would stay on the same path, even though the ground below was becoming less stable. Money was moving quickly, but it wasn't always backed by solid support. When Jay Cooke and Company failed, the effects spread quickly because the firm was connected to the same network of money and growth that powered much of the economy. Once it could no longer meet its obligations, confidence began to fall throughout the system. This caused banks to cut back on lending and businesses to slow down. As a result, jobs were lost, and economic stress became visible in people's daily lives. What had seemed stable just days earlier started to change, not all at once, but fast enough that it was impossible to ignore. Within days, the stock exchange was forced to shut down, not because of a single failure, but because the system had been pushed beyond its limits. What appeared to be strong growth turned out to be something different. It had been building pressure for a long time, but people didn't realize it. When the collapse happened, people lost income and businesses closed. Individuals and communities began to feel the effects of a system that could no longer sustain itself. The events of that day did not start the crisis. They revealed it because the real problem had been building long before. As money flowed into expansion without enough support, the system gradually lost balance until it finally collapsed. 20 years later, the same pattern reappeared, even though it didn't look the same at first. By 1893, the country had continued to grow. Businesses were still operating, and railroads kept expanding. Money kept flowing, creating a sense that everything was stable. People believed the system was strong because it had kept working, and no clear warning stood out enough to stop what was happening. On May 5, 1893, the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad collapsed. That event exposed the underlying weaknesses that had been accumulating. Expansion once again exceeded demand. Banks were involved in risky investments, and the system relied on trust to keep functioning. When that trust began to falter, the effects spread quickly as banks failed. Businesses closed, and credit became harder to obtain, leading the economy to slow in ways that impacted everyday life. Jobs were lost, wages disappeared, and what once seemed reliable started to feel uncertain. The system had gradually fallen out of balance again. even if it hadn't been fully recognized before things began to fail. The pattern stayed consistent despite differences in details, and once more, the crisis had been building long before it became clear. Decades later, the country entered another, seemingly strong period. As markets climbed, businesses expanded, and investments grew, fueling the belief that growth would continue forever. People invested in the market, often borrowing money. Financial institutions supported this expansion, expecting prices to keep rising and the system to keep advancing. In October 1929, the market began to decline, first on October 24th and then more sharply on October 29th. When confidence collapsed, it spread quickly through the system because the foundation supporting that growth was based on unstable conditions. Banks failed, businesses shut down, and unemployment rose nationwide. This changed what had seemed like steady progress into widespread hardship, affecting millions of people. People lost jobs, savings disappeared, and families struggled to meet basic needs. Not because a single event caused it, but because the system had been taking on more risk than it could handle. When that pressure was finally released, it impacted every part of daily life. What once seemed stable was built on strain beneath the surface. Like the crises before it, the Great Depression did not start the day the market fell. It had been building for some time. Money flowed into speculation without enough backing. The system gradually lost balance until it could no longer sustain itself. Each of these moments followed the same pattern. Growth outpaced stability, and the system eventually reached a breaking point. Today, the situation doesn't look the same because there isn't a single collapse defining it. The pressure remains and impacts many areas of life at once. The cost of living has gone up, wages haven't kept pace, and work has changed in ways that make stability more difficult for many people. Housing has become more difficult to afford. Healthcare costs keep rising, and daily expenses regularly strain families. What once seemed manageable now demands more effort, and this change is happening to all people nationwide. When these conditions are considered together, they do not point to a single problem. However, a pattern is re-emerging, with pressure building simultaneously across different areas, and the system continues to operate even as its internal stability diminishes. The system doesn't stop working today, which makes it harder to identify the problem. Businesses keep operating, markets keep moving, and daily life continues. Even as the framework beneath shifts, it alters how outcomes are distributed across the country. The crisis isn't caused by a single failure, but by a system that keeps functioning while the balance within it shifts in a different direction. One of the most important parts of that system is how money moves through it. That begins with government debt, as the government borrows money by selling treasury bonds to fund its operations. Banks, investment funds, institutions, and investors around the world buy these bonds. This means government debt isn't separate from the rest of the economy. It's connected to the financial system itself, and its stability depends on the steady flow of money and the confidence that keeps it going. Over time, the way people save for retirement has changed, connecting individuals directly to the system. Our pensions have been replaced by 401k accounts, which put responsibility on individuals and tie their savings to the performance of the financial markets. When markets rise, retirement accounts grow. When markets fall, those same accounts lose value, meaning individuals now bear more of the risk that institutions once managed. This connection changes the role of individuals within the system. Our retirement is no longer separate from market performance, but is directly affected by it. This means that long-term financial security depends on the same system, which is influenced by policy decisions, corporate actions, and market conditions. What happens in the system is no longer distant. It is directly connected to people's savings and their future stability. At the same time, how decisions are made within the system is influenced by the flow of money into politics. Running for office requires funding, which usually comes from individuals and organizations with the resources to provide it. This creates a connection between money and access, and that access enables influence to form before policies are fully developed. As a result, decisions are often shaped early in the process. This influence continues through lobbying, where organizations stay involved in shaping policies. They provide input and help direct the process before those policies are made public. By the time decisions are open for wider discussion, much of the outcome has already been influenced. The public's role shifts more toward reacting than shaping. Corporate structures also greatly influence how money moves within the system. Companies change prices to keep profits high, passing costs to consumers while protecting their margins. This creates a pattern where money flows upward through revenue, while costs shift downward through the system, putting pressure on individuals and smaller businesses that have less ability to adapt. The healthcare system mirrors the same structure. Costs are layered across providers, insurers, and pharmaceutical companies. Each component adds to the overall expenses, which are then passed on through premiums, deductibles, and pricing. The system continues to expand, but the financial burden falls on the people who depend on it, and that burden grows over time. Housing follows a similar pattern as properties are increasingly seen as financial assets. Large investment firms are now buying homes in large quantities, reducing availability for individual buyers and driving prices higher. This shifts the purpose of housing from a place to live to an investment, making it more difficult for families to find stability. Energy costs ripple through the entire system, affecting transportation, production, and distribution. This means that changes in energy prices don't stay isolated. They spread into the costs of goods and services across the economy. What begins as a change in one area becomes a change in many, and this impact is felt in daily life. Tax structures influence how money is distributed, as complex systems allow for adjustments that reduce liabilities for corporations and billionaires. Workers pay more directly through income taxes and spending. This leads to variations in how responsibility is shared and affects each group's contribution to the system. Global labor decisions also influence income flow. When companies relocate operations abroad to lower-cost regions to sustain profits, this cuts labor costs but also shifts income downward within domestic markets. Jobs that once offered stability are being replaced by work with less security, and this change impacts how people earn and how communities operate. Market concentration intensifies these patterns, as fewer companies come to dominate larger portions of industries, boosting their ability to influence prices and limit competition. This allows those at the top of the system to maintain control while reducing the chances for smaller companies to compete effectively. Media and information systems also shape how the system operates, as consolidation reduces the number of independent sources. Now, disinformation spreads quickly, causing confusion and division. When people see different versions of the same information, it becomes harder to develop a shared understanding, which influences how they respond to the system. The American crisis today is more complex than before. It is not caused by a single failure, but by a system where many parts are interconnected. Decisions, policies, and financial structures all work together to shape outcomes across the country. In earlier times, crises were usually tied to a single clear failure. Today, the pressure comes from many sources at once, making it harder to recognize and easier to ignore. The system remains, but the impacts are not shared equally, and that difference is felt throughout everyday life. The connection between government, corporations, and financial systems is crucial in shaping these outcomes. Decisions often favor those with more resources, and their effects are passed down. This creates a system where influence is unevenly spread, and results reflect that imbalance. Court decisions, economic policies, and global events all shape how the system works. Tariffs can raise the cost of goods, International conflicts can affect fuel prices, and policy choices can influence how industries function. These impacts do not stay isolated. They ripple through the system and affect daily life in many ways. Energy policy adds another layer, as decisions about production and supply influence prices. When those decisions align with industry interests, the effects show up in the cost of the energy people rely on every day. Laws and policy choices are written in favor of the oil industry. The American people pay the price through higher gas, utility, and food costs. When all these factors are considered, they reveal a system in which decisions, policies, and financial structures are interconnected. These links affect how costs, opportunities, and stability are distributed. They favor billionaires, corporations, and special interest groups over the American people. The American crisis today isn't caused by a single event or reason. Instead, it's a condition that has built up over time, where the system keeps working even though the balance inside it has shifted. The results of this shift are clear across the country in how people live, work, and plan. During a crisis, the first step is to recognize what is happening, because a problem can't be fixed if it's misunderstood or ignored. This involves looking beyond what's visible on the surface to understand its root causes. Once this is clear, the focus shifts to stabilizing the situation, which means slowing down enough to prevent the problem from worsening. Once stability is achieved, the next step is to identify the cause, since a crisis is usually built over time rather than triggered by a single event. Recognizing the cause allows for adjustments to the system to fix the imbalance. From there, balance is restored gradually, not all at once, through steady changes that enable the system to recover without creating new issues. The American crisis of 2026 is very complex. However, the solution is simple. Once the American people unite as one voice, there is nothing we cannot accomplish. It will take a few election cycles, but the system is built to fix itself. We hold the power, and only we can solve our problems. The government can't solve our problems. The government is our problem. Our elected officials, corporations, institutions, and special interest groups must decide. They can support the American people, or the American people will vote to remove them from office, stop supporting corporations that oppose the people, and dismantle the institutions and special interest groups affecting everyday life for Americans. Chapter 3, The American People. In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed west across the Atlantic Ocean under the Spanish flag, searching for a new route to Asia. When he reached the islands of the Caribbean, he believed he had arrived at the edge of the East Indies. For years, this belief shaped how these lands were understood, even as more voyages were undertaken and more coastlines were explored. Columbus traveled multiple times across the Atlantic, reaching parts of the Caribbean and the northern coast of South America. Still, he remained convinced he had found a route to Asia rather than a separate land entirely. His journeys paved the way for further exploration. In the years that followed, other explorers began studying these lands more closely, and their observations gradually changed how the world understood this part of the earth. Among them was the Italian explorer Amerigo Vespucci, who traveled along the coast of South America and realized that the land extended far beyond what could be explained as part of Asia. He concluded that this was a completely new continent, something the world had not known before. His writings spread across Europe and influenced scholars, mapmakers, and leaders trying to understand what had been discovered. In 1507, a German cartographer named Martin Waldseemüller created a world map based on this new understanding. And on that map, he labeled the land America, using Vespucci's Latin name. What started as a name on a map would later become something much greater than just a place, but at that moment, it was simply a way to describe a newly recognized part of the world. More than 2 centuries later, along the eastern coast of North America, 13 British colonies stretched from New Hampshire to Georgia, each one separate and governed independently. The people living there didn't see themselves as part of a single nation, and no shared identity connected them beyond their local communities. A man in Virginia would call himself a Virginian, just as a man in Massachusetts would say he was from Massachusetts. And that's how people identified themselves by their colony, town, and way of life. There was no reason for someone in one colony to feel connected to someone in another because local conditions, leadership, and concerns shaped their lives. The word American existed, but it was not their term, and it did not mean what it does today. It was mostly used by people outside the colonies to describe those living in that region. And even then, it was just a geographic label rather than an identity. The people themselves did not see themselves as Americans. That began to change as pressure from Great Britain increased because decisions made across the ocean reached every colony at once. Laws were passed that affected trade. Taxes were imposed, influencing daily life. Rules were enforced that limited local control, and those changes did not stop at colonial borders. A farmer in Virginia and a merchant in Boston still lived very different lives, but they now faced the same authority from a distant government. For the first time, people in different colonies were experiencing the same problems simultaneously. That shared experience started to connect them in a way that local identity never had. By the time fighting started in April 1775, something had already changed beneath the surface. Men from different colonies stood united. They no longer thought only about their own colony, because the situation they faced required them to act beyond it. What connected them wasn't where they were from, but what they were facing together, and that shared purpose began to shape how they saw themselves. By 1776, when independence was declared, the change had become permanent. People who had once been defined only by their colony were starting to see themselves as Americans. It reflected what they had experienced together. It was no longer something imposed from outside. It was something they had grown into through their experiences and actions. It marked the moment when separate colonies transformed into something more. They were now Americans. Over the years, America has become more than just a place on a map. It has turned into a destination for people from around the world, each bringing their own history, language, and beliefs. Native Americans had lived on the land long before the nation was formed, building communities and cultures deeply connected to it, even as later expansion disturbed their way of life. African Americans were brought to this land in chains and forced to labor under conditions that denied their freedom. Their work became a foundation of the early economy, especially in cotton production, which fueled trade and growth. Their strength, culture, and endurance became part of the nation in ways inseparable from its history, and their contribution remains central to what America became. People arrived from Europe, many driven by hardship rather than opportunity, and they came with the hope of building something better than what they had left behind. Irish families arrived during the famine of the 1840s, escaping hunger and poverty, and many took on the toughest labor in growing cities. Italian immigrants followed, building lives through construction, factory work, and small businesses, helping shape the cities and communities that still exist today. Others came looking for safety from persecution and war, including Jewish families fleeing violence and discrimination, and later escaping the destruction caused by Nazi rule. Polish and other Eastern European immigrants arrived under similar pressures, seeking stability and a chance to live without fear. Many Germans arrived in different waves, some seeking opportunity and others fleeing the conflict and destruction of war. Workers from Asia, specifically Chinese laborers, worked under hazardous conditions to build a transcontinental railroad, connecting the country from east to west and transforming how people and goods moved across the land. Their efforts helped shape the nation's expansion in ways that are still evident today. Families from Latin America, including Mexicans and Cubans, cross borders or waters in search of opportunity, stability, and safety, contributing to agriculture, construction, business, and culture, especially in states like Texas, California, and Florida. Others arrived from the Middle East and many other parts of the world, each group adding new traditions, skills, and perspectives to the country. Some families have lived in this nation for generations, while others have arrived more recently. Both are part of the same ongoing story and have helped shape who the American people are today. These differences did not vanish, and they weren't always treated fairly or equally, but they remained part of the whole. The American people weren't built from a single group or background, but from many, each contributing through work, sacrifice, and a common desire to be part of something bigger than themselves. The American Revolution demonstrated this, as it was fought not for land or expansion, but for the people's right to govern themselves. Ordinary men challenged a powerful empire, not because victory was assured, but because they recognized what they stood to lose if they did nothing. That choice established an expectation that the government should be accountable to the people, and that belief became a fundamental part of the American system. The Civil War forced the nation to confront a contradiction that had existed from the start. A country that claimed liberty could not allow slavery without facing consequences. The cost of that conflict was high, and the damage lasted long after the war ended. Even so, it proved that the system could be challenged, fixed, and reshaped over time. That pattern continued as Americans faced hardship, economic shifts, and social pressure. In each case, the response came not only from leaders, but from the people themselves. For generations, the bond between people and the system stayed strong and visible. People could see how their choices impacted their lives, and they felt their role was important in shaping those choices. That bond fostered accountability, which kept the system aligned with those it served. Over time, however, something started to change, and that change was gradual rather than sudden. The system grew larger, more complicated, and more removed from daily life. As this occurred, the connection between the people and the system began to weaken. While people are busy and distracted today, the system keeps moving forward without slowing down. Decisions are still made, policies are still shaped, and outcomes are still determined. These outcomes are influenced by those who stay consistently involved in the process. These are individuals and groups who have the time, access, and resources to remain engaged at every stage. Their ongoing participation allows them to steer the direction in ways others cannot. At the same time, people are drawn into constant conflicts with one another rather than focusing on the system itself. Political debates, cultural disputes, and social divisions dominate most conversations. These issues are real, but they don't explain why so many people face the same financial struggles. When attention is centered on each other, it distracts from the structure that shapes daily life. This allows the core problem to persist without clear intervention. The American people are not held back because they lack ability. They are held back because their attention is divided, their focus is scattered, and their energy is spent reacting instead of taking charge. The system keeps moving, not because it is stronger than the people, but because the people do not stay focused on it in a consistent and unified way. The American people have always been the foundation of this country, and that hasn't changed, even as the system has grown larger and more complex over time. From the start, the idea of self-government was based on a simple understanding that the people are not separate from the system, but are its source. That means the strength of the country doesn't come from institutions or leadership alone, but from the people. Responsibility is what people are expected to do. A system based on self-governance cannot fix itself without that involvement, because it was never designed to operate without the people who created it. When responsibility diminishes, the system doesn't fail right away. It starts to drift, and over time, that drift becomes apparent. Taking responsibility doesn't mean people have to understand every detail of how the system works. It means paying attention to what directly affects their lives and recognizing patterns rather than just reacting to isolated events. When people react, they respond to something that has already happened. When they start recognizing patterns, they begin to see what's consistent and what's changing, and that's where understanding begins. The first step forward is attention. People need to start focusing on what consistently influences their daily lives, rather than what only briefly captures their interest. This doesn't require constant study, but it does need awareness and discipline. It involves stepping back from the noise and recognizing which issues are temporary and which are structural. Cost of living, stability, access to opportunity, in the direction our country is heading are not temporary concerns. The second step is clarity. People need to start distinguishing what is real from what is distracting. This involves recognizing when attention is being diverted toward conflict that doesn't lead to solutions. It also requires understanding that disagreement between people isn't the same as the structure that influences them. When people focus only on their differences, they lose sight of their commonalities. When they acknowledge what they share, they can see the system more clearly and focus their attention where it truly matters. The third step is alignment. The American people are not a small group, and they are not divided by default. They become divided when their attention is fractured. When people realize they face many of the same conditions, they naturally come together. The fourth step is consistency. One reason the system has moved away from people is that attention has not remained steady. It increases during moments of frustration and decreases during periods of distraction. Consistency changes that pattern. When people stay aware and engaged over time, the system begins to respond to that presence. It doesn't happen instantly, but it does happen. A system built on participation will mirror the level of participation it receives. The fifth step is action. Action doesn't always have to be big or dramatic. It means making decisions based on understanding rather than politics. It means judging leadership by results instead of words. It means refusing to support what doesn't match reality. These actions may seem small, but when many people repeat them, they begin to create direction. What matters is not how quickly change happens, but the direction it shifts. The American people do not need to create something new to move forward. They need to reconnect with what already exists and bring it back into alignment with the reality they live in. That alignment does not come from force or sudden action, but from steady pressure applied over time by people who understand their role and act within it. What has been missing is not power or opportunity. What has been missing is focus. When focus returns, everything else starts to move with it. When people begin to see clearly what affects them and what does not, their attention becomes more effective. When their attention improves, their participation becomes more meaningful. When participation becomes consistent, the system starts to reflect it again. The next step isn't complicated, but it isn't easy. It requires people to change how they focus their attention, how they understand the system, and how they respond to it. They need to stop reacting to everything and start concentrating on what influences their lives. It also requires them to realize that the problem isn't our differences, but the people in charge of our government. Once people clearly realize this, they start to see that their role hasn't been taken away, but has been overlooked over time. When that role is taken seriously again, the system begins to change, not because it is forced to, but because it was designed to respond to the people within it. America started as a name on a map, but over the last 250 years, it has become something much bigger. It grew into a nation built on the idea that people can govern themselves, a concept that has rarely succeeded on this scale in history. This system, called the American experiment, has survived conflict, change, and uncertainty, and it endures because each generation carries it forward. Now that responsibility falls on our generation. Our system of government survival is not guaranteed, and it does not sustain itself. It endures only when people recognize their role and choose to stay involved, not just during election cycles, but whenever our freedom is at risk. Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. Ronald Reagan. Chapter 4, The American Experiment. On May 25, 1787, delegates gathered in Philadelphia for what would become the Constitutional Convention. The weather was warm and humid. Inside the meeting room, the conditions were even worse. The windows were kept closed to maintain secrecy, making the air thick and the heat harder to bear. These were not easy working conditions, but the delegates remained there for long hours each day. As the weeks went on, the heat increased and the room grew more uncomfortable. The men inside continued their work despite the discomfort. They knew they were dealing with something very important. They were there to build a new system of government, one that could hold together a young nation and prevent the kind of control they had just broken away from. From that meeting came a form of government built on balance and limits. The delegates agreed on a system that divided power into three branches of government: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial, so no group could control everything. One branch would make the laws, one would carry them out, and one would review them. This structure was designed to keep power from building in one place and to ensure decisions were checked at every step. They also created a system of representation so the people would have a direct role in choosing those who served them. The goal was not to create a perfect union, but one that could hold together, adjust over time, and stay accountable to the people. The convention continued through the summer with long days of debate, disagreement, and compromise. On September 17, 1787, the work was completed and the United States Constitution was signed. What they created was not just a set of rules, but a structure that depended on the people to maintain it. As the delegates left, Benjamin Franklin was asked what kind of government had been formed. His answer was simple and direct. It was a republic if you can keep it. The United States Bill of Rights was added to the Constitution to clearly protect the rights of the American people. It was ratified in 1791 as the first 10 amendments. Its purpose was clear. It placed limits on what the government could do and ensured certain freedoms could not be taken away. These rights were not granted by the government. They were recognized as belonging to the people. The First Amendment protects basic freedoms that allow people to speak and act without fear of government punishment. It includes freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, the right to assemble, and the right to petition the government. These rights allow people to question authority, share ideas, and speak out when something is wrong. The Second Amendment protects the right of the people to keep and bear arms. It was included to ensure that the people could defend themselves and maintain the ability to resist control if necessary. At the time, this was seen as part of maintaining a balance of power between the people and the government. Other amendments focus on fairness and protection under the law. They protect people from unreasonable searches, guarantee due process, and ensure the right to a fair trial. These protections limit how the government can act and require it to follow clear rules when dealing with individuals. The Bill of Rights works as a safeguard. It does not run the government, but it sets boundaries that the government cannot cross. It protects the people's role in government and ensures their rights remain intact, no matter who is in power. The American form of self-government is built on one idea. The people are in charge. They choose who represents them, and those representatives make decisions for the people. This allows our nation to function while keeping power connected to the people. At the center of this system is representation. The American people vote for leaders at the local, state, and national levels. Those leaders are expected to act in the interest of the people who elected them. This creates a direct line between everyday life and government decisions. Elections are the control point for the people. They allow the public to choose direction and replace the leaders when needed. This keeps the system from becoming fixed and reinforces that those in office serve at the will of the people. The American system of government was created as a new experiment in how government works. It was designed to be of the people, by the people, and for the people. This new system became known as the American experiment. For over 250 years, the American people have had an experiment in self-government. It has not been perfect, but it has endured. Over the past 70 years, outside money and influence have gained power within the system. In 1961, Dwight D. Eisenhower, in his farewell speech, warned of the growing influence of what he called the military-industrial complex, a network of defense contractors, government agencies, and political interests that could shape national policy beyond direct public control. Over time, this network of influence expanded. Corporations, unions, advocacy groups, and political organizations developed structured ways to affect legislation, regulation, and public policy. Campaign financing, lobbying, research, and special interest groups all play a role in shaping decisions. In 1971, Congress passed the Federal Election Campaign Act, requiring campaigns to disclose contributions and spending. After the Watergate scandal, it was expanded in 1974 to place limits on contributions and create enforcement through the Federal Election Commission. In Buckley versus Vallejo, the Supreme Court ruled that limits on campaign contributions could stand, but limits on independent political spending violated the First Amendment. This allowed money to move outside direct campaign control. In 2002, Congress passed the McCain-Feingold Act to restrict certain types of political funding and advertising. In 2010, the Supreme Court of the United States decision in Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission allowed corporations and unions to spend unlimited money on independent political activity. Soon after, SpeechNow.org versus Federal Election Commission led to the creation of super PACs, which can raise and spend unlimited funds to influence elections. These laws and court decisions have made campaign funding more susceptible to corruption. Some nonprofit organizations have been allowed to engage in political activity without full public disclosure of their donors, creating another pathway for money to enter the system. These changes did not remove money from politics. They changed how it flows, increasing its influence within the system of self-government. The American experiment of self-government was designed so that the people would elect officials to represent them, and a government would be formed to establish laws and work directly for the people. That relationship was meant to stay clear and direct, with people holding the power and electing officials to represent them. Today, a third force is present in Washington that operates between the people and their government. This force has grown over time and now holds major influence over decisions that affect the country. It is made up of special interest groups, lobbying firms, large organizations, and long-standing institutional systems such as the military-industrial complex, the pharmaceutical and healthcare industry, and the oil and energy sector. These groups are not elected by the people, but they influence policy, shape legislation, and affect decisions at the highest levels of government. Through campaign financing, lobbying, policy development, and regulatory influence, this third force has gained control that reaches into many areas of daily life. It affects decisions related to taxes, regulations, industry standards, and the systems that determine how goods are produced and distributed, including the food people buy. Behind the scenes, this machine operates around the clock. It remains in place as new members of Congress arrive and as new administrations are elected. The Washington machine is not a single entity, but a network of influence that operates within and around government, shaping decisions before they ever reach the public. It runs continuously, powered by money and influence. The flow of power is no longer flowing from the people to our government. It now passes through an additional layer of influence that plays a significant role in decision-making. Our government is not broken, it has been taken over. The people are no longer in control of how decisions are made. Decisions are being made that do not align with what people expect or need, and those decisions persist regardless of who gets elected. People vote, they pay attention when serious issues come up, and things continue the same way. That creates a sense that the system is moving on its own. When people believe their role does not matter, they step back. Most people do not have time to track laws, agencies, and decisions that span various levels. When something is hard to understand, people stop trying to follow it. Fixing this does not require tearing the system down. It requires bringing it back to how it was meant to work. The government belongs to the people, but it only stays that way when people stay involved. That means paying attention beyond elections and understanding how decisions are being made. Voting is required by everyone, but it is only one part of the process. Staying informed, speaking up, and holding people accountable are what keep the system balanced. When those actions happen together, the system moves back toward the people. When they do not, it moves further away. The problem is visible because the system is not responding the way it should, and people see it in their daily lives. Decisions are being made that do not reflect what people expect or need, and those decisions continue regardless of elections. The American experiment is now an American crisis. People feel it in their daily lives. It shows up in what people pay, how they live, and the choices they are forced to make. Groceries cost more, gas costs more, and utility bills keep rising. Housing has become harder to afford, whether renting or buying. Healthcare costs remain high, and insurance does not always cover what people need. Wages do not keep up with the cost of living, and many people are working more just to stay even. Debt continues to grow as people try to keep up. Credit card balances increase, and higher interest rates make that debt harder to manage. Borrowing has become more expensive, and savings are harder to build. Families are making decisions about what they can afford and what they must put off. Interest rates have made it harder to buy, and affordable housing is limited. People are paying more for less space and fewer options. Insurance premiums are higher, and out-of-pocket costs are harder to manage. Prescription drugs are expensive, and many delay care because they cannot afford them. Small businesses and everyday operations are dealing with increased pressure from tariffs and regulations. Supply costs have gone up and are being passed on to consumers. Regulations make it harder for small businesses to operate and grow. These issues affect how goods are priced, how services are delivered, and how businesses survive. The question we must ask ourselves is how to restore our government, how to solve the problems that are affecting everyday life, how to control the Washington machine, and how the people can regain their power. Following the money is one of the most important steps. Money leaves a trail that shows who is funding campaigns and shaping decisions. When funding sources are clear, it becomes easier to see who is influencing policy and why. Holding representatives accountable means watching how representatives vote and comparing those actions to what they promised. If those actions do not match, they should be replaced. Representatives must be loyal to the American people. Representatives should spend most of their time in their own districts. With modern technology, they can meet, debate, and vote remotely while remaining visible to the public. This keeps representatives closer to the people and reduces outside influence. It also allows people to see how decisions are made in real time. Increasing direct public involvement makes the system more responsive. Regular town halls, open meetings, and direct communication should be part of the process. People should be able to ask questions, give input, and understand what is happening before outcomes are decided. Transparency in government is necessary for accountability. Decisions should not be made behind closed doors without public awareness. Meetings, discussions, and votes should be recorded and available for people to see. Information should be easy to access and understand. Public engagement must be continuous. The system operates every day, and influence does not stop between elections. Staying aware of what is happening and responding when needed keeps the system connected to the people. Unity is one of the most important parts of any solution. The system does not change when people are divided. It changes when people recognize shared problems and act together. When people stay focused on what matters, they become harder to ignore. Restoring the balance of power means reducing the influence of outside forces and strengthening the role of the people. Decisions should reflect the needs of the public, not the priorities of those with access or funding. Voting matters, but it must be done with purpose and supported by continued involvement. The system works when people use it as intended. The American experiment is in its 250th year. This experiment in self-government will continue, but only with the help of the American people. It is now our generation's time. Our job is to restore our government to its original intent. It is now our responsibility to make our country what it was and will always be, that shining city on the hill. The American people will always defend freedom and our God-given right of self-government. We will never surrender our government to a king or tyrant. We will not allow corporate greed, special interest groups, billionaires, and foreign countries to control our government with money. America does not need a strong man. It needs strong men and women willing to stand up for freedom. It is our generation's time, not only for us, but for generations to come. The American experiment in self-government will continue as long as we stand united, with one voice and as one nation. There is nothing the American people cannot accomplish when we unite once again. Chapter 5: The Washington Machine. When the founders chose the banks of the Potomac River as the capital of the United States, they were not building a throne or a kingdom. They were creating a place of service. Having just broken free from a distant crown, they had no intention of replacing one form of control with another. Washington was meant to be modest, a place where representatives would gather, debate, and return home to the people who sent them. Power was never meant to stay. It was meant to pass through, tied to the will of the people. Authority was to be granted, used carefully, and returned to the people. George Washington understood the weight of power because he had seen what it could become. He had led an army against a king and knew how easily authority could drift away from the people. When he became president, he chose restraint. He stepped down after 2 terms, not because he had to, but because he believed no one should remain in power too long. His warning that the government is a force was not a rejection of government, but a reminder of its nature. Even good government applies pressure, and that pressure must always be watched. Alexander Hamilton saw a different risk. The young nation was in debt, divided, and uncertain. He believed structure would protect liberty. He built financial systems, organized taxation, and created order because he understood that a republic without stability could fail. His work helped secure the country, but it also set a pattern. Once a system is built, it rarely disappears. Each solution leaves behind a structure, and those structures tend to remain. Thomas Jefferson feared that pattern. He believed liberty shrinks as government grows, and that small steps taken in necessity can build into something larger than intended. He believed each generation must watch power carefully. Yet even Jefferson expanded federal authority with the Louisiana Purchase. That decision doubled the nation's size and required new systems of administration and oversight. Expansion demanded management, and management required permanence. Each decision made sense, but each added weight to the center. In the early years, Washington remained small. The federal government had limited reach into daily life. Most people lived in communities where local decisions mattered most. The federal role focused on national stability and foreign affairs. It was limited by design and scale. It was not yet a machine. That changed during the Civil War. The crisis demanded coordination that could not be handled locally. Armies had to be supplied, railroads managed, and communication organized across a divided nation. Authority moved inward because unity was required for survival. When the war ended, the systems built to manage it did not disappear. They had proven effective, and effectiveness tends to remain. The Great Depression brought another expansion. Banks failed, businesses collapsed, and families lost everything. The crisis overwhelmed local systems, pushing the nation to look toward Washington. Programs were created to stabilize the economy and support workers. Agencies multiplied, and federal authority expanded into areas once handled locally. The expansion restored order, but the structures remained. Temporary solutions became permanent. World War II strengthened this pattern. Government and industry worked together at a national scale, producing equipment and supplies at unprecedented levels. Coordination tied private enterprise closely to federal decision-making. When the war ended, the Cold War followed. Defense systems remained, intelligence networks expanded, and military spending stayed high. The systems built for crisis became part of everyday government. With each decade, Washington became more permanent. Agencies developed full-time staff, departments built long-term budgets, and the government became a career rather than a short-term service. Elections continued, but the structure remained steady. Rules expanded, oversight increased, and operations became continuous. The Capitol was no longer just a meeting place. It had become an operating system. By the modern era, Washington had become something the founders would not recognize. It was no longer just a place where laws were debated. It was a network of agencies, departments, and offices processing policies, regulations, and budgets every day. It did not slow with elections or shrink with new leadership. It continued operating because it had learned to function beyond any single administration. By the mid-20th century, Washington was no longer growing. It was settled. Agencies formed during crises became permanent. Offices had staff had budgets, and budgets required renewal, and renewal favored continuity. What was temporary became expected. As the system matured, it became more layered and more technical. Rules multiplied, oversight expanded, and decisions moved through complex paths. Many within the system were dedicated, but the structure became difficult to follow. Complexity began to protect itself. When something is hard to understand, it is hard to challenge. Efforts were made to reduce parts of the government, but the overall structure remained. Some areas shrank while others expanded. The system adapted without disappearing. At the same time, the economy changed. Markets became global, manufacturing moved overseas, and financial systems grew more complex. Washington responded by adding more coordination and oversight. By the early 21st century, the pattern was clear. After the September 11th attacks, new security systems were created, new agencies were formed, and surveillance expanded. These changes were driven by immediate need, but like earlier expansions, they remain. Security became part of the permanent structure. At this stage, the Washington machine had fully formed. It operated continuously through budgets, regulations, contracts, and policy. Leadership changed, but the system continued. Elections brought new voices, but the structure remained. The machine did not stop. As the system matured, a clear pattern emerged. The government no longer depended on a crisis to justify its size or function. It operated continuously through budgets, regulations, contracts, and policy work. Elections still brought new leadership and debate remained visible, but beneath that surface, the system maintained a steady rhythm. What had once been built to respond to emergencies had become a permanent framework that carried forward regardless of who held office. For many people, this created a familiar feeling. Presidents changed, parties gained and lost control, and campaigns promised major change. Yet much of the long-term direction remained steady. Defense commitments continued. Major programs stayed in place, and the national debt kept rising. Policies shifted at the edges, but rarely in ways that matched the intensity of campaign promises. The system appeared flexible in debate, but steady in outcome. This did not mean elections had no effect. Leaders still shaped policy, set priorities, and influenced decisions that affected millions of lives. Laws were passed and budgets were set, but those actions took place within a structure built over decades. That structure created limits, sometimes visible and sometimes not, that shaped how far change could go and how quickly it could happen. Over time, this pattern began to affect trust. People could see the energy of campaigns and hear promises of change. But when governing began, the results often felt smaller. The gap between strong words and steady outcomes became more noticeable. Politics grew louder, while direction remained consistent. This did not come from a single decision. It came from the structure itself. Agencies protect funding because funding supports operations and people. Legislators protect their influence because it supports their position. Financial systems favor stability because it protects investment. The media favors attention because it sustains revenue. These forces do not require coordination. They align naturally, and when they do, continuity becomes the default. In that environment, change becomes difficult. Reform must move through layers of review, approval, and process. Proposals are examined, revised, and delayed as they pass through committees, regulations, and legal interpretation. Even widely supported ideas take time. That time allows existing systems to remain in place. The result is a system that responds, but moves slowly when it comes to major change. For most people, the structure behind these decisions is not visible. What they experience are the results. Taxes are collected, costs rise, and policies affect daily life. Energy prices shift, healthcare costs change, and financial conditions adjust. These outcomes come from decisions made within the system, but the path from decision to result is complex. People feel the effects more than they see the process. A system based on self-government depends on trust. Trust depends on the belief that authority remains connected to the people. When that connection becomes harder to see, confidence weakens. Participation may increase, but patience decreases. Debate becomes sharper, but the system continues to operate within its established patterns. The founders feared power concentrated in a single leader. What they could not fully predict was how power could concentrate through structure. Instead of a single point of control, authority was spread across layers, creating a system that was difficult to influence quickly. This form of concentration does not rely on one person. It relies on accumulated process and continuity. That accumulated momentum defines the Washington machine. It does not require secrecy. It operates through established procedures, reinforced over time. Stability becomes a priority because stability protects the system. Over time, preserving the structure becomes part of its function. Government is necessary and plays an essential role in maintaining order and protecting rights. The question is whether the system still serves the people first or whether self-preservation has become its stronger instinct. Observers often see the same pattern repeat. New leadership arrives with plans for change. The debate follows with intensity. But when decisions are made, they move within the existing structure. Major commitments remain, long-term programs continue, and direction shifts slowly. Change is possible, but it takes time and often progresses more slowly than expected. As this continues, the relationship between the people and the system becomes more complex. People vote and participate, but their input moves through layers built over time. The result is a balance between responsiveness and stability, but that balance can feel uneven. The challenge is not simply to expand or reduce government. It is to understand how the system works. The structure in place today was built step by step, shaped by real needs. Each layer was added for a reason. Over time, those layers formed a system with its own momentum. Understanding that momentum matters. A system built over generations cannot be changed quickly without consequences. At the same time, a system that is not examined can drift from its original purpose. Maintaining balance requires awareness from both leaders and the people. The Capitol still stands along the Potomac River, representing a nation built on self-government. The Constitution still defines its authority, but the system built around those principles has grown more complex and more permanent than originally intended. Complexity carries power, and it shapes decisions, controls pace, and influences outcomes. Over time, structure becomes familiar, and familiarity can lead to acceptance. But acceptance without understanding allows systems to continue without question. The Washington machine was built over time, shaped by necessity, and strengthened by repetition. It has provided stability during crisis and continuity during change. At the same time, it has created distance and complexity, raising questions about accountability. The future of that system depends on how well it is understood. If people recognize how it works, they are better able to shape it. If it remains unclear, it will continue operating as it has. The question is not whether the machine exists. The question is whether it continues to serve the people first, or whether preserving itself has become its primary function. That answer will not come from a single election. It will come over time through awareness, participation, and a clear understanding of the system we now have. Chapter 6: The Washington Cartel. Power in Washington does not only sit inside government buildings, it also exists in offices owned by large corporations, in law firms filled with lobbyists, in boardrooms where executives make quiet plans, and in networks of donors who help decide who can run for office. The Washington Cartel is not a gang in the street. It does not wear uniforms. It does not hide in shadows. It works in plain sight. It works through money, access, and influence. A cartel, in simple terms, is a group that protects its own power. It works together to keep control. In Washington, the cartel comprises of major corporations, special interest groups, powerful financial firms, defense contractors, technology giants, and wealthy donors who fund both political parties. They may compete in business, but when it comes to protecting their place in Washington, they often move in the same direction. The Washington Cartel relies on the Washington machine. They provide the money to keep the machine running in favor of corporations and other organizations. The cartel is made up of people and organizations. The machine is how the cartel controls power in Washington and shapes the decisions that people make every day. The cartel runs on access. Access means being in the room before the public ever hears about a new law. It means helping to write the laws before they are announced. It means meeting with lawmakers and agency officials long before a vote takes place. Most people only see a bill when it is debated on television. The cartel sees it when it is still being shaped. Campaign money is one of its strongest tools. Running for office is expensive. Candidates must raise millions of dollars to compete. That money does not come from bake sales and small checks alone. It comes from major donors, corporate groups, and political action committees. These donors often give money to both parties. They do not bet on one side. They invest in stability. Whoever wins, they still have a seat at the table. This is how the cartel protects itself. It does not need one party to win. It needs both parties to depend on the same funding system. When elections are over, lawmakers still need money for the next campaign. That means the door stays open for the same donors year after year. Voters change, politicians change, but the funding system remains. Lobbyists are another key part of the structure. They are not criminals. They are professionals. Many are former lawmakers or former agency staff members. They know how Washington works because they have worked inside it. When they leave government, they often go to work for the industries they once oversaw. Later, some return to the government again. This revolving door creates relationships that last for decades. Over time, those relationships shape decisions. When a new bill is proposed, industry groups submit lengthy written comments explaining why certain parts of a bill or law should be changed. They offer technical advice. They suggest edits and warn of job losses or market problems. Lawmakers and agencies listen because these companies are large employers and major investors. The result is that laws often grow more complex and more favorable to the industries most involved in shaping them. The financial sector plays a powerful role in this system. Large banks and investment firms manage trillions of dollars. Their choices affect housing markets, retirement savings, small businesses, and global trade. When financial crises happen, government officials often step in to protect the larger system. That protection may prevent collapse, but it also creates a pattern. Big institutions are rescued. Ordinary families absorb the cost through job losses, higher prices, or prolonged recoveries. Defense contractors also sit close to power. National security is a serious concern, and military strength requires advanced equipment. A small number of companies supply much of that equipment. Contracts last for years and involve billions of dollars. Lawmakers whose districts depend on these contracts defend them strongly. The cycle becomes self-supporting. Spending supports jobs, jobs support elections, and elections protect spending. Healthcare companies follow a similar path. Drug makers, hospital networks, and insurance firms work closely with regulators. They argue that their costs reflect research, risk, and care. But year after year, families see prices rise faster than wages. Medical bills arrive that are hard to understand. Insurance plans change with fine print that few can decode. The system becomes so complex that only specialists truly understand it. Complexity protects those inside it. Technology companies are now part of this structure as well. A handful of firms control major platforms for communication and commerce. They manage vast amounts of data. They meet with federal officials about security, privacy, and content rules. They contribute to campaigns. They shape how information spreads. Because so much of modern life depends on their platforms, the government often moves carefully around them. The media ties it all together. Large media companies depend on advertising from major corporations. They also rely on access to political leaders. News often focuses on party fights and sharp words exchanged on the floor of Congress. What receives less attention is how both parties rely on the same donors, the same industries, and the same long-standing networks of influence. The public mostly sees the drama. The Washington cartel creates a feeling that the system is fixed, not fixed in the sense that votes are counted incorrectly, but fixed in the sense that major outcomes rarely change. Elections shift tone and change language, but certain patterns remain. Defense budgets remain high. Corporate mergers continue. Healthcare costs rise. Financial markets expand. And lobbying remains constant. The strength of the Washington cartel is that it feels normal. Lobbying is legal, and campaign donations are legal. Consulting contracts are legal. Nothing looks dramatic or illegal. It works through rules that have grown over time. Each change was small. Each adjustment seemed technical. Over the decades, those small changes have added up. The Washington cartel is powerful, but it is not unstoppable. It exists because incentives reward it. Change the incentives, and the structure begins to shift. That can mean stronger transparency rules. It can mean limits on the revolving door. It can mean clearer campaign finance laws. It can mean simplifying regulations so ordinary people can understand them. It can mean protecting whistleblowers who expose hidden alignment. The cartel does not need public approval. It needs public distraction or division. When neighbors argue over cultural issues, when social media feeds fill with outrage, and when television panels debate personalities rather than structure, attention shifts away from deeper questions. The way money shapes law receives far less focus. Division is not always intentional, but it is often useful. The future of the republic depends on whether this concentration continues unchecked or whether balance is restored. The Washington cartel represents a stage in the evolution of modern government. shaped by capital, complexity, and continuity. It is powerful because it is embedded. It is durable because it feels normal. The Washington cartel depends on the idea that the system is too big and too complex to understand. It depends on people believing that high finance, federal regulation, defense contracting, digital platforms, and healthcare systems are far beyond their reach. It depends on people who think that this is just how it works. But when enough people see that the system consistently favors a particular group of institutions, something begins to change. The problem no longer looks like bad luck. It begins to look like a structure, and structure can be changed. People do not need to storm the gates. They need to stay present. Presence means paying attention not just during elections, but during legislation. It means asking who wrote the bill before asking who voted for it. It means following money as closely as slogans. It means demanding plain language rather than technical jargon. It means supporting leaders who represent the people. The cartel's power weakens in the light. When donor networks are transparent, patterns become clear. When revolving door restrictions are enforced, incentives begin to change. When regulatory language is simplified, complexity no longer hides advantage. When media organizations focus on influence instead of personalities, awareness grows. The Washington cartel relies on the idea that people are too divided to unite around reform. If people continue fighting one another over every headline, the Washington cartel will remain in power. But if people with different views begin to agree on transparency, accountability, and fairness, power can be restored to the people. Cartels collapse when the cost of maintaining control exceeds the benefit. In Washington, that cost is public trust. The Washington cartel is strong because it is embedded in so many parts of everyday life. It touches the cost of housing, the price of health care, the availability of jobs, and even the way information is shared. It does not need to control every outcome to remain powerful. It only needs to influence enough of the system to keep its position secure. That influence builds slowly over time, reinforced by relationships, funding, and a constant presence in the places where decisions are made. The question is not whether the Washington cartel and its influence should exist. Influence will always exist in any system of government. The real question is how we stop them. How do we bust up the monopolies? How do we restore power to the people? The answer is simple. We hold our representatives accountable. We expose corruption in our government. We pass laws to prevent them from having power. We investigate and hold people and organizations accountable under the law. We hold public hearings and expose the truth. We shut down the flow of money that gives the cartels power. The American people have the power and money to stop the cartel. We own our government. We fund our government. We also have our money, and we control where our money goes. So we stop funding the cartels. We stop supporting organizations against the American people. The Washington cartel represents less than 1% of our population. The American people are the remaining 99%. We have the majority, the money, and hold all the power. We only need to use our power. Understanding the Washington machine and how the cartel now controls our government is the first step. How we take back control is the next step. But there is more than just the cartel. They are only a portion of those who have control of our government. They are part of the 1% of our population that now controls our government and affects the everyday lives of the remaining 99%. Chapter 7, The 1%. Most Americans do not resent success. They admire it when it is tied to innovation and hard work. What unsettles them is the sense that the ladder upward is becoming harder to climb. When wages rise slowly while housing, healthcare, and education costs rise quickly, families feel pressure. When they see record levels of wealth at the top while their own budgets tighten, questions begin to surface. The American dream depends on the belief that effort leads to advancement. When that belief weakens, trust weakens with it. The 1%, in its simplest meaning, describes those who hold the highest levels of wealth in the country. Wealth is part of the story, and it cannot be ignored. It becomes more significant when it begins to shape the rules under which others live. Ownership that grows quietly in investment accounts can influence markets, industries, and policy priorities. The conversation is not about punishing success. It is about understanding how success connects to power. A free nation thrives when opportunity remains broad and when success does not close doors behind it. Prosperity at the top does not have to mean hardship below. The question is whether the system can maintain mobility, fairness, and accountability as wealth becomes more concentrated. The American experiment has always balanced ambition with responsibility. The goal has never been to tear down achievement. It has been to ensure that achievement does not place anyone beyond accountability. Wealth can strengthen a nation when it operates within clear boundaries. It can strain a nation when it moves decision makers away from the daily realities most families face. The 1% in our government is not a measure of wealth, but power. It describes a small group of people and institutions that consistently remain involved in shaping laws, policies, and decisions. These are the individuals and networks that stay close to power and influence how the system operates. This group includes the Washington Cartel, along with special interest groups, major donors, corporate leadership, and policy networks that remain present throughout the decision-making process. It also includes individuals within government who operate within that same system of influence, where access, relationships, and financial support are closely connected. The term 1% reflects size as much as wealth. It represents a small portion of the population that is consistently involved in shaping decisions that affect the entire country. While the exact number is not fixed, it represents a very small share of the total number of voters. The 1% is not limited to one role. It includes elected officials who help shape laws, judges who interpret those laws, and executive leadership that directs policy and enforcement. It also includes government contractors and advisors who work closely with decision makers and remain involved in policy implementation. Outside our government, there are corporate executives and board members who lead large companies and benefit from policies that affect their industries. It includes major investors and billionaires whose resources allow them to support candidates, influence priorities, and benefit from tax structures and regulatory decisions. There are also individuals within the broader system who benefit through position, access, or alignment with those in power. What connects all of these groups is not a title or a job. It is their proximity to influence. They remain close to decision-making and benefit from how the system operates. By contrast, the 99% are the American people who live within that system every day. They work, pay bills, raise families, and experience the results of decisions after they are made, rather than shaping them early in the process. The difference is not just wealth. It is a small group that helps shape the system, while the majority live with the outcome. Power in America rarely moves through obvious channels. It moves through organized, legal, and continuous influence. When discussing how the 1% shapes law and policy, the focus is not on hidden conspiracies. It is on a structured system of political financing, lobbying, regulatory negotiation, and legislative drafting that keeps certain interests involved at every stage. Campaign financing is one of the clearest examples. Running for federal office is expensive. Senate campaigns often cost tens of millions of dollars, and presidential campaigns now cost billions. Candidates must raise money constantly to remain competitive. That money does not come evenly from ordinary households. It comes largely from large donors, corporate political action committees, industry groups, and super PACs. Individual contributions exist, but major donors provide a large portion of campaign money. They host events, bundle contributions, and support independent campaigns. Financial support does not always control decisions, but it ensures access. When lawmakers depend on these funding sources, they remain attentive to those who provide them. Political action committees represent industries such as energy, pharmaceuticals, banking, defense, and technology. They support candidates aligned with their interests. Super PACs amplify messaging and influence the broader political environment. Over time, this creates awareness among lawmakers about which positions attract support and which do not. The result is a system shaped by consistent incentives. Lobbying adds another layer. Lobbyists represent corporations, trade groups, and organizations. They meet regularly with lawmakers, provide research, and help shape legislation. Many have prior government experience, allowing them to navigate the system efficiently. This creates continuity where the same individuals remain involved in different roles. Corporate tax policy shows how this structure works in practice. Large legislative packages often include targeted credits, depreciation rules, and industry exemptions. These provisions are embedded in long, complex bills. Corporate teams study the details and organize their operations to use them. Smaller businesses and individual taxpayers rarely have the same resources. Over time, this can shift how the burden is carried, placing more weight on wages while reducing exposure for complex capital structures. Deregulation follows a similar path. Industries argue that some rules increase costs or slow growth. In some cases, updates are reasonable. The question is who shapes those changes. When industry voices are deeply involved in drafting, standards can shift to lower compliance costs while increasing long-term risk. The effects may not appear right away, but they often surface later through instability, environmental damage, or financial strain that reaches the public. Defense contracting reflects how aligned interests reinforce the system. Large contractors depend on federal spending, and long-term agreements provide stability for both companies and policymakers. Decisions about spending are tied to jobs, regional economies, and national priorities. This creates a structure where continued investment is supported from multiple directions. It does not require direct wrongdoing. It operates through ongoing relationships and shared incentives. Healthcare policy shows the same pattern in another form. Pharmaceutical companies work to influence pricing rules and protections. Insurance providers shape reimbursement systems, and large healthcare networks consolidate to gain leverage. Families feel the results through premiums, deductibles, and prescription costs. What appears to be a personal expense is often tied to a system established earlier in the process. Media and digital platforms add another layer. Ownership determines which stories are highlighted and how often they are repeated. Algorithms influence what people see and what remains less visible. Campaigns and organizations use targeted messaging based on data and behavior. Information becomes both a product and a tool. Influence over visibility shapes how people understand events. The influence of the 1% does not remain within policy or institutions. It moves outward and becomes part of everyday life. Housing is a clear example. Large investment firms and private equity groups purchase properties on a scale and convert them into rental portfolios. Local supply tightens and prices rise faster than wages. Families trying to buy homes compete with institutions that have far greater capital. Access becomes shaped by scale rather than simple demand. Energy markets follow the same pattern. Decisions about production, infrastructure, and regulation influence supply. When supply tightens or costs rise, prices increase. Those increases do not stay within the industry. Transportation becomes more expensive, and those costs are passed on to goods and services. Food, materials, and basic items reflect these changes. What appears as rising prices often connects to earlier decisions in the system. Financial systems affect households in quieter ways. Interest rate changes influence mortgage payments and credit costs. Consolidation reduces local competition. Shifts in regulation can increase short-term returns while adding long-term risk. When that risk surfaces, the impact reaches workers and taxpayers. Financial downturns show how decisions made within the system can affect millions at once. Technology platforms shape daily routines in ways that are not always visible. Changes in algorithms can quickly affect small businesses and independent creators. Data collection influences advertising, pricing, and consumer behavior. Many people depend on these platforms for income or access, but have little influence over how they operate. The system remains controlled by those who design and manage it. Education and student debt show how long-term structures affect life decisions. Rising costs often coincide with expanded systems and reliance on financing. Institutions and financial services benefit from the structure, while students carry long-term obligations. These obligations shape careers, family decisions, and financial stability for years. Labor markets reflect the same structure. Trade agreements, automation, and tax policies influence where jobs are located and how they are paid. When production shifts, communities lose stability. When policies favor capital over wages, income gaps widen. Workers are expected to adapt, but many conditions were set long before the effects became visible. The modern system is also shaped by executive decisions that can move quickly and affect the economy. Trade policy and military activity are two of the most direct examples. These decisions may be based on national priorities, but their effects reach into daily life. Tariffs are taxes on imported goods. They are often presented as protection for domestic industries. In practice, the cost moves through the system. Importers pay more, manufacturers pay more, and retailers pass costs forward. Consumers ultimately absorb the increase. What begins as policy becomes higher prices. Tariffs can also lead to responses from other countries. This can reduce export opportunities for domestic industries. Agriculture and manufacturing can be affected when markets shrink. Income declines in some regions, and stability weakens over time. The connection between policy and outcome becomes clearer as effects spread. Military activity adds another layer. Even limited conflict can create uncertainty in global markets. That uncertainty affects energy supply and trade routes. When supply is uncertain, prices rise, energy markets respond quickly, and costs are passed on to transportation and production. Higher fuel costs increase the cost of moving goods, and those costs are reflected in everyday items. This creates a chain reaction. Energy affects transportation, transportation affects goods, and goods affect household expenses. Families may not follow global events closely, but they feel the results through higher prices. The judicial branch shapes how these systems operate over time. Courts interpret laws and define how they are enforced. Their decisions determine how much authority regulators have and how broadly laws apply. When authority is limited, oversight narrows. When authority expands, oversight increases. Over time, court decisions influence how regulation works across industries. Some rulings limit how agencies act. Others affect how money moves through the political system. These decisions shape the environment in which policy is created and applied. The 1% that is now in control of our government is hidden from public view. They do not show their faces, but you can follow the money. When gas prices rise and corporate profits increase, consumers pay more. The money trail is very clear. When a federal agent receives a sack filled with $50,000 in cash, and it makes the news and goes viral on social media, it is clear how money shapes policy. When a congressman has a net worth of less than $100,000 when he first goes to Washington, and in a few years he has millions of dollars, the money trail can usually be traced back to its source. It can be tied to a stock option given or insider trading secrets. But there is usually a paper trail. When tax breaks are given to billion-dollar corporations and billionaires, there is usually an increase in their portfolio and net worth in the following years. When billionaires double their net worth, corporations see record profits and consumers pay more. The pattern is clear, and you do not need a financial degree to see the money trail. What is harder to see is how policy is costing consumers more in simple everyday items like eggs, milk, and beef. We are paying almost twice as much for the same product we were getting last year. There is no way an egg can double in price without some form of price fixing. Another problem is that when prices go up, they seldom come down. Tariffs have caused price increases, but even domestic products have risen, leaving no clear explanation. Inflation led to higher prices, but when inflation eased, food prices did not. They stayed high. The corporations that sold the products showed record profits, while the consumers paid more out of their pocket. Following the money and investigating corporations can lead to explanations. A little research can go a long way. Once a corporation can be identified as making a profit at a consumer's expense, there is a problem. For every problem, there is a solution. The solution is to stop buying the products from that corporation. Stop shopping at places where you clearly see price increases without explanation. Start hurting their profit margins. That is one example of how to fight back. When there is clear evidence of a congressman making profits from insider trading, kickbacks, and other forms of unexplained income, you must vote them all out of office and push for reform. When a federal worker receives large amounts of cash, they need to be treated like a drug dealer. Their assets need to be seized, and they need to face federal charges. Roughly 2 to 3 million people in this country affect the lives of over 200 million. When that happens, we have an American crisis. But what they forgot was the power of the 99%. The people who work hard and go to work every day. The honest people who do not break laws, take kickbacks, or accept bribes. The American people have common sense. We know a crisis when we see one. We own our government, and we have the power and the money. All we need to do is vote. It may take a few election cycles, but we can fix our problems. We can restore our government to what our founders intended. We cannot allow 1% of the population to control our lives and our finances. The 1% may have power, money, and connections, but we do outnumber them 10 to 1. Our power is in numbers. We are the ones who are supporting their corporations. We are the people who fund their security. We, the people, have all the power we need. All we have to do is unite and vote. Chapter 8, The Power of the 99%. People often talk about the 1%, but no one mentions the 99%. The 99% are the people who rise each morning and step into roles that keep everything moving. They are the drivers who guide trucks across interstate highways before sunrise. They are the nurses who check on patients overnight. They are the teachers who unlock classroom doors before children arrive. They are the welders, clerks, farmers, mechanics, technicians, electricians, servers, builders, caregivers, and small business owners who carry responsibility without question. When people begin to recognize that they have more in common, a new clarity emerges. It becomes clear that a neighbor who votes differently still struggles with the same grocery prices. A coworker who attends a different church still worries about the same rent increase. A family across town with a different background still hopes for the same security. Rising costs do not ask for party affiliation. Medical bills do not check ideology. This shared reality becomes a bridge. It connects with people who once believed they had little in common. When millions of people understand that they have the same hopes, dreams, and struggles, disagreement begins to fade. Disagreement is one of the quiet forces that weakens public trust. When people believe they are alone in their frustration, they tend to endure silently. They assume the problem rests with them. But when they discover that their story is repeated across the nation, awareness transforms into unity, and unity transforms into influence. For too long, division has distracted the public from this reality. While neighbors debated one another, the issues affecting their daily lives continued in the background. When people step back from these distractions, they notice something important. Their daily struggles do not come from one another. They come from systems that have drifted away from the needs of the majority. This understanding does not create anger. It redirects focus to the root of the problem. When people begin to see that they are not competitors fighting over political differences, but fellow Americans, a shift takes place. They realize they are the people sustaining a shared nation. The farmers in a rural county and the cashier in a crowded city both depend on stable systems. The factory worker and the school teacher both rely on wages that keep pace with the cost of living. The young couple saving for a first home and the older couple living on a fixed income both share similar issues. As awareness grows, expectations begin to change. For years, many people accepted that rising costs were inevitable, that wages would lag, and that stability would require constant sacrifice. When expectations begin to reflect the belief that conditions can improve, that belief signals confidence that systems can be adjusted. This change encourages people to ask not only what is happening, but why it is happening. It encourages people to look at policies and legislation with their own eyes. It encourages people to vote not for political reasons, but for personal reasons. It encourages conversations that are less about winning arguments and more about solving shared problems. This unity does not require identical beliefs. It requires shared purpose. People can disagree about many things and still agree that stability, dignity, and opportunity should not be reserved for a small fraction of the population. Different cultural views can exist alongside common financial concerns. Unity built on shared needs proves stronger than unity built on uniform opinions. When people begin to recognize their responsibility to the nation, change begins to happen. They realize we are the tax base supporting public institutions. We are a workforce sustaining a private enterprise. We are the consumers driving economic activity. We are the first responders holding communities together. We are the parents raising the next generation. When this is understood, people stop viewing themselves as powerless observers. The power we hold is not the power to destroy. It is the power to correct. It is the power to realign systems with reality. It is the power to insist that effort leads to stability rather than exhaustion. It is the power to restore balance without tearing down what works. The idea that government belongs to the people is not new. That principle can feel distant, buried under layers of complexity and distraction. But when people reconnect with the simple truth that authority flows upward from the people, something important returns. Confidence returns, clarity replaces confusion, and purpose replaces anger. When people begin to see that they are not asking for special treatment, their message becomes clearer. They are asking for alignment between the people and our government. They are asking that systems reflect the lives of the people who sustain the government. They are asking that the power be returned to the people. No single household can lower national housing prices. No individual employee can adjust wage standards across industries. No one family can influence healthcare markets alone. But millions of people and families, aware of their shared position, can insist that these systems operate with fairness and transparency. Participation takes many different forms. It includes voting with intention rather than habit. It includes attending community meetings and asking practical questions. It includes supporting local efforts that strengthen neighborhoods. It includes discussing issues with neighbors in ways that seek understanding rather than victory. It includes refusing to spread information that divides without solving problems. These actions may seem small, but when repeated by millions, they become something big. People are beginning to recognize that a nation's greatest resource is not wealth stored in bank accounts, but trust shared among millions. Trust grows when people listen to one another's experiences. A factory worker describing overtime that no longer stretches as far can find common ground with a nurse explaining rising insurance premiums. A farmer noting increased equipment costs can relate to a teacher discussing classroom supply shortages. These conversations build bridges that strengthen communities. When people remain involved in elections, leaders recognize that public attention is not temporary. When people continue asking clear questions beyond a single news cycle, institutions begin to understand that accountability cannot be ignored. Power returns when people unite as one voice. A divided public struggles to move forward. A united public can make things happen. When people stop viewing one another as competitors and begin seeing one another as partners in our government, power returns to the people. The American people stop blaming each other and start finding real solutions. There is strength in recognizing that most people want the same standards. Parents across the country want safe neighborhoods and strong schools. Workers want reliable wages and predictable costs. Small business owners want stable customers and fair regulations. Retirees want security after decades of contribution. These desires do not conflict. They align. When people recognize this alignment, they can speak with one voice. Speaking with one voice does not mean reciting identical words. It means expressing shared priorities with clarity. When millions communicate that affordability matters, affordability becomes central. When people communicate that transparency matters, transparency cannot be ignored. When people communicate that opportunity must remain accessible, leaders are required to respond with plans, not promises. Institutions do not need to be dismantled to be improved. They need to be reminded of their purpose. Institutions exist to serve the public. When service drifts into self-preservation, correction becomes necessary. Correction guided by unity strengthens institutions rather than weakening them. Trust is essential for stability. Without it, suspicion grows and cooperation declines. When people believe that systems operate fairly, they invest more confidently in their communities. They start businesses, buy homes, and plan the future. Responsibility is mandatory in a self-government, in a powerful word. It recognizes that in a self-governed nation, the direction of the country cannot remain separate from the will of its people. When people understand that they are not spectators watching history unfold, they begin to choose to engage in simple, consistent ways. In doing so, they reinforce the principle that authority rests with the public. People begin to expect transparency as a normal part of government. They expect budgets to reflect priorities that support households rather than narrow interests. They expect regulations to be clear and easy to understand. They expect leaders to explain decisions in plain language rather than hide behind complexity. These expectations do not demand perfection, but they establish a standard that can be measured and understood. The power of the 99% is not rooted in wealth, but in numbers. It is the power to vote and to hold leaders accountable through that vote. The people hold a practical form of authority. They can elect new representatives. They can withdraw support from those who do not act in their best interest. The true strength of a nation becomes clear when people of different political views stand together around shared principles. That unity does not form around a party or a label. It forms around the idea that the people are the rightful owners of their government. It is rooted in the belief in freedom of speech, the right to demonstrate, and the right to vote. Above all, it forms around the understanding that government exists to serve the people, not to rule them. The foundation of a republic is simple and clear. The people are the owners of their government. That ownership is not symbolic. It is practical. It lives in our votes, in our voices, and in the resources that support public institutions. People can remove those who betray public trust. They can support businesses that operate with integrity. They can organize, speak, and withdraw support from leaders who forget who placed them in positions of responsibility. In a republic, power does not flow downward from wealth or influence. It flows upward from the people, and it remains there as long as they are willing to use it. Our founders built a system of government that could correct itself. The American experiment of self-government has endured for 250 years. The American people have power in several ways. First are our votes, but they are no good when we are divided. We fund our government through taxes we pay. But most of all, we can use our personal finances to boycott corporations that are not people-friendly. When corporations choose profit over affordability, then the people must fight back. We stand up to corruption because justice matters. When people and organizations break laws, they must be prosecuted. We change laws that are more aligned with the people and not corporations and special interest groups. But most importantly, stay involved. Do not take our government for granted. The power of the 99% is in our unity and in our votes. We have all the power we need. We supply the money that supports the 1% who are affecting the lives of the 99%. The power we have is in unity, money, and our Constitution. Our founders built a government for us, the people. They gave us the power to restore our government. Our government is now 250 years old, and it needs a good restoration. We are still using a system of government that was designed for horse travel, not air travel. We have come a long way, but our government is still in the 19th century. We have the power to restore our government. We can bring our government into the 21st century. We have all the power we need. We just need to use our common sense. We only need 61% to change our government. Once the 99% come together and realize we all share the same dreams, fears, and problems, we will then bring our nation closer to a more perfect union, a nation we can all be proud of, a nation that is respected in the world, one nation under God with unity and justice for all. Chapter 9, The American Restoration. The American Restoration begins with participation. Everyone needs to join and participate. But first, we must unite. We can do anything together. This is not about me or you. It is about us, we, the people, our government. We are all in this together. We are family. We are brothers, sisters, moms, and dads. We all share the same government, taxes, laws, energy costs, and problems. We may not look like brothers and sisters, but we are all connected. We must put our differences aside and unite. We must stop seeing each other as enemies and see ourselves as family, because we are the children of this nation. Our generation has to restore our government to what it was meant to be. The American experiment of self-government has lasted 250 years. Our generation must protect it for the next 1,000 years. After 250 years, our government deserves a proper restoration and modernization for the future. Our founders never meant for us to keep our government the same, and our Constitution was meant to be modified. That is why they made amendments. If they were here today, the first thing they would do would be to restore power to the people. Every restoration project begins with a blueprint and a schedule. It requires preparation and planning. It will require engineers, architects, project managers, skilled workers, and laborers. It will take money, but most of all, it will take public involvement. Below is an outline for our project. The American Restoration Schedule. Project 2026. The American people unite. We organize, plan, and conduct our research. We make a list of the problems with our government. We decide how we will rebuild our government. We gather our power by recruiting Democrats, Republicans, and independents. Our goal is 200 million American citizens. That leaves about 60 million voters who might want to keep things the way they are. They represent about 20% of our population who benefit from a broken government. On the 4th of July, 2026, we all pledge allegiance to each other and to our flag. We must all commit to restoring our government to the people. We register as many voters as possible, and in November, we remove every elected official who does not represent the people. We vote out anyone who is not for the American people. Everyone makes mistakes, and just like after the Civil War, we will need amnesty. Amnesty means a government pardon given to elected officials so we can move forward without punishment. Every elected official must commit to the American people. They must confess any crimes they may have committed while serving and expose any corruption. Any elected official who does not comply could face criminal charges in the future. Our goal for 2026 is to do as much good as possible and take control of both the House and Senate as the American people, not as Democrats or Republicans. We might have to vote as a Democrat or a Republican, but our votes will be for people who represent us, the people. This is not about a party, but about people, the American people. Project 2027. In January, we begin a new Congress with a new spirit. We will start by working together. There will still be members of Congress and senators who are not loyal to the people. It will take a few more election cycles to remove all the anti-American politicians. But our goal is to convert as many as possible and replace those we cannot. Eventually, the people will take back our House and Senate. We must choose a new president who will represent us, not the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, but the American people. This will not be easy because we will be up against a powerful group of people, corporations, and organizations that want us to fail. They will spend millions, if not billions of dollars, trying to prevent us from winning in November. During this time, we must make a new blueprint for our government. We will need people who understand our government and how it works. We will need economists, scientists, health experts, and professionals to help design our new government. But we will also need everyone. We need every American who believes in this country to join in. Our goal in Project 2027 is to make a blueprint for our new government and organize 200 million people together in one direction, a new direction toward a better government and a better future. We will identify the right people who can lead us in the right direction. We will choose a new candidate for president that all American people can get behind. Project 2028. Once we decide on a new candidate for president, we must then choose a running mate. The American people need help in choosing this candidate. We do not need to leave this to one person as we have done in the past. Remember, we are doing things differently now and everything is based on us, the people. Our vice president must be our second choice for president. The logical choice for vice president will be the runner-up. We must carefully choose our next senators and House representatives. We must finalize our blueprint for a new government. We must identify our problems and our solutions. The American people will take back the presidency. We will join together as one nation, put our differences aside, and stop seeing each other as opponents. We will regain our power. We have all the power we need. We only need to use it. In November 2028, we ensure that we not only take the House, the Senate, and the presidency, but also take back control with over 60% support. We will have full power to make amendments and constitutional reform. This will be our power and how we restore power to the people. We show the world what it means to be an American. We vote like our lives are at stake, and we return power to the people. We win with the biggest turnout in American history. We plan to appoint our new cabinet members and our team to rebuild our government. Project 2029 is the American Restoration. Once we take back control, we begin restoring our government. We do not tear down our existing government. We build a new government alongside it. Our government will continue to run in the background. This is an open remodel, and we cannot shut down the government, but we can begin the long process of restoration. We will ensure that our new government is built on solid ground. We will eliminate waste and clean the house. The American restoration will take time, it will take patience, but most of all, it will take the American people. We cannot do this without support from the people. We will need people to stay involved in our government. We must hold our elected officials accountable. We must ensure we remove outside influence and money. The American restoration will take at least 4 years. But once we finish, we will have a new government. We will have a new vision for our future and for generations to come. America will once again be closer to a more perfect union. But we will always need to make repairs and look for improvement. Our work will never be done. Freedom is not free. It takes work. A government of the people, by the people, and for the people will take a lot of people. The first step in that restoration is simple. Elected officials must be closer to the people. The distance between representatives and the public has grown too wide, weakening accountability. When decisions are made far from daily life, the system relies on reports rather than on real conditions. Representation was never meant to work this way. It was designed to be direct, visible, and connected to the people. In the past, distance made this separation necessary. Travel was slow and communication was limited. Today, those limits no longer exist. Technology enables real-time communication and constant access. The tools are available to eliminate distance, but the structure has not changed to reflect it. The system still operates as if those limits remain. Washington should be a meeting place, not a place of residence. Officials should be based in their districts and spend most of their time there. They should maintain offices in their communities and stay connected to real conditions. When representatives live and work among the people, they understand the impact of policy through experience, not reports. This strengthens decision-making and restores accountability. Regular communication must also be required. Monthly town hall meetings should be standard, not optional. These meetings must allow direct questions from citizens and must be open and consistent. All meetings should be recorded and made available in real time. When communication is visible, accountability becomes natural. People can see what is said and how it is answered, and trust begins to return. This approach strengthens the government. It aligns representation with reality and reduces the gap between policy and outcome. It ensures that decisions reflect actual conditions and not distant assumptions. The role of an elected official is to serve the people, and service requires presence. When representatives remain close to the people, accountability becomes continuous rather than occasional. Restoration is not optional. It is required to preserve what was built and ensure it continues to serve the people. The following articles of reform is an example of what is required. Chapter 10. The Articles of Constitutional Restoration. Article 1. Transparency in Politics. All political contributions, spending, and lobbying activity must be reported in real time and made publicly accessible. This includes all donors, organizations, and intermediaries, with no exceptions, delays, or undisclosed channels. Article 2. Plain and transparent lawmaking. All laws must be written in plain language, made public before any vote, and limited to a single subject. No hidden provisions, bundled legislation, or rushed votes without adequate public review will be allowed. Article 3. Independent Ethics and Oversight Authority. An independent ethics office must investigate misconduct across all branches of government without political influence. This authority must have full power to investigate, subpoena, enforce compliance, and publish findings without interference. Article 4. Financial Disclosure and Conflict of Interest. All candidates, elected officials, judges, and senior staff must fully disclose financial holdings and conflicts of interest. Disclosures must be accurate, regularly updated, publicly available, and enforced by an independent authority. Article 5. Whistleblower Protection and Accountability. Individuals who report wrongdoing must be protected by law, and oversight officials cannot be removed without public notice and documented cause. Retaliation will result in penalties, and all removals must be transparent, justified, and subject to review. Article 6. Judicial Ethics and Supreme Court Reform. The Supreme Court and all federal judges must follow enforceable ethics rules, including full financial disclosure and mandatory recusal. Any judge found to have accepted bribes or improper benefits will be subject to investigation, removal, and prosecution. Article 7. Term limits and rotation of power. Term limits must be established for members of Congress and for federal judges. These limits must ensure leadership rotation while preserving experience and continuity. Article 8. Fair representation and redistricting. Electoral districts must be drawn with equal population by an independent, nonpartisan authority. No political party or elected official may control or influence the redistricting process. Article 9. Secure and verifiable elections. All voting systems must include paper records, routine audits, and clear certification processes. Voting must require verified citizenship supported by secure identification and automatic voter registration systems. Article 10. Electoral System Reform. The Electoral College must be reformed to better reflect the will of the people while preserving balance among the states. All reforms must maintain fairness, prevent imbalance, and protect election integrity. Article 11. Legislative process reform. Debate must be protected, but procedures such as the filibuster must be reformed to prevent indefinite obstruction. Government shutdowns must be prevented, and members of Congress shall not receive pay during shutdown periods. Article 12. Executive branch accountability. Executive leaders must undergo background checks, fully disclose financial interests, and remain under independent oversight. These requirements must apply before appointment and continue throughout their service. Article 13. Presidential standards and powers. All presidential and vice presidential candidates must pass strict background checks and full financial disclosure reviews. Presidential actions, including pardons, executive orders, tariffs, and major financial decisions, must be transparent and subject to independent review. Article 14. Anti-corruption enforcement. Any exchange of money, assets, or benefits for political influence will be considered a criminal offense. Violations will result in imprisonment, financial penalties, asset seizure, and removal from office. Article 15. Government accountability under law. All elected officials, appointees, and government employees must be held to the highest legal standards. All crimes must be reported and prosecuted, and no individual is above the law, including current or former presidents. Article 16. Technology transparency and public protection. Government use of technology must remain lawful, transparent, and subject to public oversight. Surveillance, data use, and automated systems must protect rights and operate under clear legal limits. Article 17. Secure identification systems. Secure identification systems, both digital and physical, must support voting and public services while protecting privacy. Systems must be reliable, accessible, and designed to prevent fraud without infringing on rights. Article 18. Immigration reform. Immigration policy must include background checks, modernized visa systems, and clearly defined worker regulations. Policies must be enforced consistently while maintaining order, fairness, and national security. Article 19. Protection of federal institutions. Federal agencies may not be eliminated or significantly weakened without approval from Congress. All changes must undergo public review to prevent misuse of authority or removal of essential services. Article 20. National financial stability. Long-term budgeting standards and enforceable debt controls must protect the nation's financial future. Spending and borrowing must be managed responsibly to protect future generations. Article 21. Representation and local accountability. Members of Congress must primarily work within their home districts with limited time in Washington, D.C. They must remain accessible to the people and reflect the needs and will of their communities. Restoration is not an act of replacement, it is an act of preservation. The goal is not to discard what was built, but to ensure that it continues to function as it was intended. Every generation inherits a system shaped by those who came before it, and that system can remain strong only if it is maintained with care and adjusted when needed. When that responsibility is ignored, the structure weakens over time. When it is accepted, the system endures and continues to serve its purpose. The Capitol building stands today because it was never left to decline. When it was damaged, it was repaired. When it became too small, it was expanded. When materials weakened, they were replaced. Each generation understood that preservation required action, not assumption. No one expected the building to remain strong without attention, and no one believed that time alone would protect it. The same standard must now be applied to our government. A government cannot remain aligned with the people if it is not maintained with the same level of discipline. The reforms outlined in this chapter are not designed to disrupt the country's foundation. They are designed to restore balance where imbalance has developed over time. They focus on transparency, accountability, and connection, which are the essential elements of a functioning system. These reforms are not abstract ideas. They are practical adjustments meant to bring government back within reach of the people and ensure that decisions reflect real conditions. When these elements are present, the system becomes more stable and more effective. A visible government can be understood. A government that is accountable can be trusted. A government connected to the people can function as it was designed to. These principles are not new, and they have been part of the system from the beginning. What has changed is the distance between those principles and how the system operates today. Restoration is the process of closing that distance and returning the system to its intended alignment. The tools required for restoration already exist. The framework allows for change, and the structure can be improved without being replaced. Technology enables greater transparency, improved communication, and stronger accountability. The direction can be corrected without creating instability, and the system can be reinforced without losing its foundation. What remains is the decision to act and the discipline to follow through with that action. The question is not whether restoration is possible. The question is whether it will be carried out with the seriousness it requires. A system that has lasted this long deserves to be preserved with care and strengthened for the future. It must remain aligned with the people it was created to serve and continue to function in a way that reflects the needs of a modern nation. What is maintained will endure, and what is ignored will decline. The capital has endured because it was maintained. The system it represents must now be treated the same way. The American restoration will take time and patience. It will not be designed by one person or even a few. It must be designed by the American people and for the American people. In 1776, the first Americans had to fight for their independence. Today, the American people have a new battle. It is a fight to regain our power and to take back control of our government. The American restoration will need people. People willing to fight for all of us, the American people. Our government is not the answer because, right now, it is part of the problem. As with any restoration project, we will need to be organized because organization is the key to success. We need professionals who can design a new system that is more effective and efficient. We will need volunteers, civic leaders, and help from all political parties. This is not about politics. We must put politics and our differences aside. Restoration is much more important than any political debate. There will be time in our future to debate our differences. It is now our generation's time. Our moment in history to restore our American experiment in self-government. We must build a better government for the next generation and for hundreds of generations to come. It will not be easy, and many challenges lie ahead. But we can do this together. First, we must unite again. We cannot rebuild our government while divided. There is nothing the American people cannot do once we make up our minds. Chapter 11, The Declaration of Restoration. When the people see that their government no longer listens or respects our ownership, it becomes not only our right but our responsibility to unite again. We must stand up, not against a king, but against a government that has forgotten who is in charge. This is not rebellion, it is restoration. A free nation does not survive because of money or weapons. It survives because of its people and their responsibility to protect their freedom and self-government. Our first declaration in 1776 fought against tyranny and a king. The Declaration of 2026 stands against a government with too much power and people who allow problems to worsen. In 1776, we broke free from control. Now we must break free from corruption and division. When power serves the rich, powerful, multinational corporations and special interest groups. When truth is distorted, while leaders place themselves above the people, it is time to remember that power belongs to the people. Therefore, we, the people, declare not out of anger, but out of responsibility, in honor of those who sacrificed everything for freedom. We renew our promise to this generation in generations to come. America has never been perfect, but it has always moved forward. Freedom is not guaranteed. It must be protected by each generation. In this, our nation's 250th year, we restore power to the people. It is our duty to correct a government that no longer functions as intended. Change will not come from words alone, but from people who act. Restoration begins with participation. Democracy must be practiced every day, not just during elections. Systems that protect power over people must be rebuilt. The nation must believe in itself again. Change is never easy, but it is necessary. We do not speak out of hate for our country, but out of love for it. We are not here to tear it down, but to restore it. We seek a government the people can trust again. The American people have not given up. We still believe in our country and its future. The people of the United States, having endured corruption and division, now stand united again as one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let history record our grievances. Our government no longer answers to the people. Decisions are driven by money and influence instead of fairness. Laws are shaped behind closed doors by people never elected. A permanent political class has taken control instead of serving the public. Elections focus more on money than on ideas. Public office has become a career rather than a duty. Truth has become harder to find, and information is used to divide rather than inform. The American people are divided, and that division is exploited. Justice is no longer equal, and fairness too often depends on money or connections. Freedom feels diminished as people hesitate to speak openly, privacy fades, and trust erodes. Opportunity is not equal, and the economy no longer rewards hard work as it should. The cost of living rises while wages fall behind. Education struggles, teachers are underpaid, and many are not taught how our government works. Healthcare is too expensive, and many cannot afford basic care. The environment is harmed for short-term gain, leaving future generations to pay the price. Wars continue without clear purpose, and those who serve are too often forgotten. Technology expands without clear limits. Privacy is lost. People are watched more than protected. Honesty is ignored. Accountability is missing. And those who speak the truth are often punished. Our government is no longer fully controlled by the people. As billionaires, corporations, special interests, and outside influence shape laws, we, the people, to form a more perfect union, now stand united again. We remember what our founders fought and died for. Freedom comes from the people who defend it every day. Independence is not just history, it is our responsibility today. We will ensure that liberty does not fade. We speak not to divide, but to unite. We are not here to destroy, but to restore. We will restore honesty, fairness, truth, justice, and power to the people. We will protect the right to speak, to believe, to work, to vote, to protest, and to live freely. We will make public office a duty, not a privilege. We will stand for workers, families, and the first responders who carry this country every day. We will restore dignity, leadership, and purpose to our government. This is our promise to the future. Self-government belongs to the people, and we will protect it for generations to come. We will not surrender this nation to corruption, corporate greed, socialism, fascism, or communism. We, the American people, believe in the American experiment of self-government. We will measure success not by wealth, but by the health and well-being of the people. We will choose unity over division, truth over lies, and responsibility over comfort. Let this stand as our covenant, that freedom will remain the birthright of every person, of every race, faith, and background, for as long as this nation endures. With faith in one another, with firm reliance on divine providence, we, the people of these United States, united in purpose and bound by principle, renew the promise of self-government, that this nation shall remain of the people, by the people, and for the people. To that promise, we pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Chapter 12, A New Call to Serve. There are times when people begin to feel that something is not right, not because they have heard or read about it, but because they can see it in everyday life, in the way people talk to each other, in how quickly small disagreements turn into arguments, and in how hard it has become to listen without reacting. Most people do not sit down to explain what is happening. They feel it in their homes, in their communities, and in their conversations. When that feeling grows, they begin to look for direction, not only from government, but from the voices they hear every day, the ones that shape how people think, how they speak, and how they respond to one another. From songs they hear, to movies they watch, to athletes they follow. Messages that spread across screens and reach millions in minutes. Those voices have always played a role in this country's life. In earlier generations, they came through radio, film, and music that reached across towns and cities, bringing people together. In contrast, today, those same voices reach even further through screens and digital platforms that carry messages across the country in moments. The reach is not what defines their importance. It is the effect they have on how people see each other and how they choose to act. Because when someone is seen and heard by many, what they say and how they say it begins to shape the tone of the country itself. We have seen before what happens when those voices choose to step forward in a way that brings people together instead of pulling them apart. One of the clearest examples came during the Second World War, when the country faced a challenge that required people from different places, different backgrounds, and different beliefs to stand together. Not just in words, but in action. And during that time, several well-known figures in entertainment made a choice that reached far beyond their careers and into the lives of ordinary people across the country. Jimmy Stewart had already built a successful acting career, and he could have remained in Hollywood, where his work was safe and familiar. Instead, he enlisted in the Army Air Forces, where he became a bomber pilot, flew missions over Europe, facing the same dangers as other men in uniform. When people saw that, they did not just see an actor in a different role. They saw someone they recognized. That image carried meaning because it showed that fame did not separate a person from responsibility, but made that responsibility visible to everyone watching. Henry Fonda made a similar decision when he left his career to join the Navy, and Clark Gable followed, entering the Army Air Forces. These choices were not made for attention or recognition. They believed that they should take part in what the country was facing. When people saw these men step into the same reality as everyone else, it created a sense of connection that could not be forced through words alone. Because people respond to what they see, and what they saw was that the country was not divided, but people were moving in the same direction. Not every form of service required carrying a weapon or flying a mission, but service still took place in ways that mattered just as much to the people who needed it. Bob Hope became known for traveling to perform for troops stationed far from home, bringing laughter into places where stress and uncertainty were part of daily life. Glenn Miller led military bands that played music across different locations, giving people something familiar, a reminder of home, and these efforts helped keep people connected to what they were fighting for. These moments were not about fame or image, they were about example. When people saw those examples repeated, they began to understand that they were part of something shared, something that did not depend on status or position, but on a willingness to stand together when it mattered. That understanding helped hold the country together during a time when it could have easily been pulled apart by fear and uncertainty. As the country moved forward into the years that followed, the need for unity did not disappear. Another moment showed people how influence could still be used to strengthen the country rather than weaken it. That moment came when Elvis Presley reached the height of his fame and became one of the most recognized figures in the world, with music that reached millions and an image that was seen almost everywhere. When he was drafted into the Army in 1958, Many people expected him to take a different path, that his status would place him above the requirements others faced, but he did not choose that path. Instead, he entered service like any other soldier, wearing the same uniform, living under the same conditions, and not separating himself from the people around him. When people saw that, it reminded them of something they had seen before, that success does not remove responsibility, but makes it more visible, and that visibility carries weight. That moment mattered because it was not explained to people, it was shown to them. When people see someone at the height of success step into the same role as everyone else, it changes how they understand both success and responsibility. It shows that influence is not about standing apart, but about setting an example others can follow, and such examples stay with people long after the moment has passed. As time progressed, the role of public figures continued to grow, and the ways people received information began to change. Ronald Reagan, who began his career as an actor, developed the ability to speak in a way people could understand, and when he later entered public life, that ability proved important in moments when the country needed clarity and steadiness. When people hear something delivered steadily and clearly, they are more likely to stay connected, even when they do not agree on everything. That connection is what allows a country to function. Without it, every difference becomes a division, and every disagreement becomes a reason to pull apart. That is why the way people speak matters just as much as what they say. What these examples show is a pattern that has not changed, even as the world around it has changed. That pattern is simple. People who are seen and heard by many carry influence, and that influence shapes how others respond to one another, whether it is used to divide or to bring people together. That choice is made every day in the words that are spoken and the examples that are set. Today, the reach of those voices is greater than ever before, and messages move faster than at any time in history. This means that the effect of those messages is felt more quickly and by more people. In that kind of environment, the responsibility that comes with influence becomes even more important. It helps shape how people respond in moments when they might react without thinking. The country does not lack voices or opinions. What it needs is direction in how those voices are used. The examples from earlier generations still matter because they show what is possible, that influence can be used to strengthen the country rather than weaken it. People who are seen and heard by millions can choose to bring others closer together rather than push them apart. We have already seen how influence can be used to bring people together, and that pattern did not end with earlier generations. It has continued as people from different backgrounds stepped into roles that carried responsibility beyond their original work. Clint Eastwood showed this in a simple but clear way when he moved from film into public service at the local level, serving as mayor of Carmel, California. His role was not about large national issues, but about everyday decisions that affected people in their own community. He showed that influence need not remain in one place, but can be applied where people live and where it can have a direct effect. Arnold Schwarzenegger followed a different path, but one that reached a similar point. He became widely known through bodybuilding and film before entering public life and serving as governor of California. His approach often focused on shared effort and common goals. He helped bring people into the conversation instead of pushing them out. When people feel included, they are more willing to listen, which makes it easier for them to stay connected. Even when they do not agree on everything, that connection is what keeps a country from dividing into separate parts. In recent years, the reach of public figures has expanded beyond traditional media, and messages now move through platforms that allow direct communication with large audiences at any time, creating both opportunity and risk. It allows people to speak clearly and directly, but also increases the chance that messages will spread quickly without thought or reflection. In that kind of environment, the role of those with influence becomes even more important because they help guide how people respond in moments when reactions can spread faster than understanding. Volodymyr Zelensky provides a clear example of how communication can strengthen unity during a difficult time. He began as an actor. He learned to connect with people in a direct, simple way. When he later became president during a time of conflict, that ability became central to his leadership. He spoke in clear language and remained visible, which allowed people to see that he was present and facing the same reality they were. That presence helped build trust and keep people steady during uncertainty. Dolly Parton shows another way that influence can be used, one that does not rely on large moments but on steady effort over time. Through her work in literacy and community support, she has reached millions of children and families from diverse backgrounds. Her focus has remained on what people share rather than what separates them, creating space for connection without conflict. That kind of influence builds unity quietly, but in a way that lasts. Today, the country is not facing a single moment that defines a common direction as it did earlier. We are facing a different kind of challenge, one that appears in how people speak to one another, how quickly they react, and how easily division grows when tone becomes harsh or careless. In that kind of environment, the role of those who influence culture becomes even more important, because culture shapes how people respond long before any law or policy takes effect. Musicians, actors, athletes, directors, and public figures all play a role in shaping that culture because they reach people in direct, personal ways. When they choose to use their voice in a way that steadies rather than divides, it helps create an environment where people can remain connected. The responsibility that comes with influence is not about telling people what to think, but about shaping how people treat one another while they think, because that is what determines whether disagreement leads to discussion or division. And people are more likely to reflect that in their own conversations when they see examples of respect and a steady tone. This is where the call to serve exists today, not in a single place, not in a single role, but in the daily choices made by those who are seen and heard by millions. Because each message, each statement, and each example contributes to the direction people move together. Over time, those choices build patterns that shape how the country functions. The country doesn't need every voice to agree, nor does it need all messages to be identical. It does need a tone that helps people stay connected as they work through their differences. That tone is largely shaped by those who influence culture every day, whether they intend to or not. Freedom of speech and freedom of assembly are allowed in our country, but without the support of the people in our generation, we may not be free in the next generation. Now ask yourself this question: what are you willing to do to save it? Saving it depends on unity. It begins with how people speak, how they act, and how they choose to treat one another. When those seen and heard by millions use their voices to unite and bring people back together, it helps hold the country together at a time when it could easily come apart. This is not about stepping into politics or taking on a role that does not fit, but about understanding that influence already carries responsibility. That responsibility does not wait for permission. It exists the moment people begin to listen. And when that responsibility is used with purpose, it becomes a form of service that strengthens the country from the ground up. The opportunity is here, and your reach is already in place. What remains is the choice of how that influence is used, because it can divide or unite. The decision you make today could shape the direction of this country in the days ahead. How history will look back on your life and career will be determined not by your words, but by your decision to get involved or stay on the sidelines. Encouraging people to vote, finding ways to unite, and showing acts of kindness. You are one of us. We are the people. We are the owners of our government. You also have responsibilities. Your voice carries a lot of weight. Your opinion matters, and as an American, you should also care about the direction our country is headed. You may not be an American citizen, but you are human. Freedom and self-governance are not only American rights, but also God-given human rights. This call is not only for Americans, but to all nations that value freedom, liberty, and justice for all humans. The American experiment and our government have made mistakes. We are making mistakes today. The American people have made mistakes because we are human, but we learn from our mistakes. We have always fought for freedom, not only in America, but all over the world. America now needs everyone to stand up and unite, to take our government back from the corporations, the special interest groups, the multinational organizations, and our corrupt politicians who are allowing this to happen. We especially need our entertainers, athletes, musicians, actors, directors, and everyone with a following. The call to serve now is urgent. We need you, your voice, your help. Every vote matters, every voice matters, and people matter. Not just black or white, but all people, Asian, Latino, European, Cuban, Native American, because America is made up of hundreds of different cultures and backgrounds. What we all share is freedom, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom to protest, and the right to govern ourselves. Most of all, freedom matters. Without freedom, America and the American experiment cannot continue. We also need justice because justice matters. We have to hold the organizations and people accountable for allowing this to happen. But we must show compassion. We must invite them to join us in our fight for freedom because they are human too, and we all make mistakes. The call to serve is also extended to our elected officials. Not all politicians are corrupt, and many are fighting for freedom, justice, and the people. You also need to stand up and voice your concerns and identify where the system has failed. You know where the problems are and who is to blame. We need your help to restore our government to its original intent. I also call on the media and news organizations. It is now time for you to draw the line between profits and patriotism. Are you going to continue to promote division and disinformation? Are you going to stand up for America and the American people? If they can take away our votes, our right to speak freely, do you not think you are next? I call on our corporate leaders and executives. It is time to show your true colors. Are you going to stand up for freedom and the American people? Are you going to allow profits and bottom-line decisions to take precedence over the good of the American people? Will you stand up for the people? Will you look out not only for your best interest, but also for the American people? I call on the church and all faith-based organizations. Will you stop feeding division and keep a clear separation between church and state? Will you lead with unity, kindness, and truth? The question is not what would Jesus do, but what will you do now to bring people together and help unite this country again? Finally, I call on the American people. Everyone must do their part. Everyone must stop fighting each other and start fighting the real problems we all share. I call on you to do your job as an American. Register to vote and research the people running for Congress and other political positions. Get involved, support good, honest people, hold them accountable, and make sure they vote for bills that are in the people's favor. When they do not represent the people, you must vote them out. Stay involved, ask questions, hold people accountable, and make sure our elected officials are doing what they promise. Do not spread disinformation. Make sure you research and fact-check every post that may not be factual. Do not forward division or anything meant to divide people. They depend on people to help promote division. By doing this, you are helping the organizations and people against us, the American people. We need every American who believes in the American experiment of self-government and freedom. It is our time, our moment in history to serve. Chapter 13, The Road We Choose Together. We, the people, must now decide what kind of future we want. We can keep letting a small group of special interests, corporations, and the 1% steer our lives, or we can take back control of our government and its direction. The choice we make will shape not only the present, but also the lives of our children and grandchildren. Such a decision takes courage, patience, and dedication. The path we choose together will impact not only America but also the world, because freedom is not just an American right, it is a human right. The Revolutionary War was a pivotal moment not just in American history, but in global history. It demonstrated that people could govern themselves without kings, dictators, or authoritarian regimes. Americans have sacrificed their lives to defend liberty, fighting to protect it both at home and abroad. The American experience has never been tied to a single race, class, or background. It is rooted in the belief that liberty belongs to every person, no matter what their origin. America now faces a critical choice. It can keep going down a path where politicians, corporations, and organized interests set the rules of daily life, or it can change course and restore balance between the people and those in power. The longer this imbalance persists, the harder the correction becomes. Waiting only makes the systems that have drifted from the people stronger. Together, not as Democrats, Republicans, or independents, but as Americans, we the people can achieve more than we often realize. In 1776, few could have imagined what the young republic would become. Likewise, few today can fully envision what the next chapter of America might look like if people choose unity over division and responsibility over resentment. Rebuilding trust in government and shaping a renewed future isn't just possible. It's essential if our nation is to stay strong and confident in the years ahead. The road to renewal will not be easy. Meaningful change requires honesty about what is broken and determination to fix it. The American people have faced such moments before. After the war, we rebuilt. After economic collapse, we recovered. After tragedy, we supported each other. We expanded civil rights when conscience demanded it and strengthened institutions when justice called for it. The same spirit remains alive in communities across the nation. The spirit of 1776 still lives in every American who believes in freedom. The future relies on unity. Unity doesn't mean agreeing on everything. It means showing respect, listening, and remembering that this country is big enough for many beliefs, cultures, and dreams. As unity grows, division fades and stability grows stronger. America has found greatness before when people chose cooperation over conflict, and that option is still available today. America becomes stronger when its people take responsibility for its direction. Responsibility includes participation, dedication, service, and consistent engagement in civic life. Some serve in uniform, while others serve in classrooms, hospitals, on construction sites, in small businesses, and in local organizations. Some lead publicly, while others quietly strengthen communities. A nation rises not through a single grand act, but through millions of steady efforts made by ordinary people. Change does not originate from anger alone. While anger can reveal injustice, it doesn't create stability. Renewal demands steady hands and hearts. It occurs when people prioritize truth over fear, fairness over selfishness, and cooperation over hostility. A nation is strengthened not by tearing down, but by building up. The tools for renewal already exist. What matters is whether they are used. One of America's greatest strengths has always been its diversity. Different histories, cultures, and experiences contribute to the nation's vitality. Diversity requires patience and understanding that disagreement does not mean hostility. The country cannot become stronger if differences are seen as permanent divisions. Unity does not mean sameness. It requires dignity. It asks people to respect one another even when they disagree. When disagreements occur within a shared commitment to fairness and mutual respect, they become constructive rather than destructive. A stronger America must safeguard every family's ability to build a stable life. Stability includes safe neighborhoods, reliable education, accessible health care, and meaningful employment. While the government plays a role in shaping the conditions that make these possible, communities also bear responsibility. Neighbors supporting each other, families investing in schools, and workers upholding fairness standards all contribute to national strength. Policy and culture move together. Laws create the structure, but daily actions determine whether that structure succeeds. Technology now impacts nearly every aspect of modern life. Communication, commerce, education, and government all operate through digital systems that didn't exist a generation ago. These systems offer both promise and risk. When used wisely, technology broadens opportunities and access to information. When used carelessly, it can distort truth and compromise privacy. An informed public that understands how technology influences society helps protect liberty in the digital age. People who demand transparency from institutions and accountability from corporations help ensure that innovation supports freedom rather than undermining it. Service remains one of the strongest forces for unity. It can take many forms, including military service, public safety, medical care, teaching, mentoring, environmental stewardship, and civic volunteering. Service emphasizes that freedom is maintained through contribution. When people dedicate time and effort to something bigger than themselves, they strengthen the bonds that connect communities. A nation built only on personal success cannot last, but a nation grounded in shared responsibility can. Freedom comes with responsibility. The right to speak freely is upheld when speech is honest. The right to vote is meaningful when people participate thoughtfully. The right to assemble and protest is powerful when done with discipline and purpose. A republic flourishes when rights and responsibilities stay in balance. When one side outweighs the other, stability starts to weaken. Unity serves as the foundation for renewal. It does not erase differences, but recognizes that all people share a constitutional home and a common future. The country is large enough to embrace many perspectives, as long as those perspectives operate within respect for the rule of law and equal protection. When people view each other as partners rather than adversaries, progress becomes possible. The direction of the nation won't be decided by speeches alone. Instead, it will be shaped by the consistent choices of millions who decide whether to get involved or step back. Engagement boosts legitimacy. Legitimacy enhances stability, and stability safeguards liberty. The way forward relies on whether people opt for continuous involvement rather than sudden reactions. America's future does not belong to any single region, ideology, or generation. It belongs to those willing to invest in it through informed participation and responsible behavior. The principles that shape the nation's founding remain relevant, not because they are old, but because they are lasting. A republic thrives when its people remember that self-government is an active duty, not a passive inheritance. Every generation has faced its own defining challenge. Some confronted external threats, others corrected internal injustice, some rebuilt after the economic collapse, while others expanded the reach of equal protection. Each generation inherited both the achievements and the unfinished work of those who came before. This generation is no different. The pressures of rising costs, rapid technological change, political division, and institutional distrust create a moment of strain, not finality. Strain can weaken a system, but it can also reveal where reinforcement is needed. Reinforcement starts with clarity. People who understand how authority flows are less likely to give it up out of frustration. When people see that government exists by their consent, they begin to see participation as a duty rather than an inconvenience. They vote intentionally rather than out of habit. They ask informed questions and expect clear, easy-to-understand answers. They refuse to accept confusion as normal. By doing so, they restore balance without chaos. The renewal of a nation does not need dramatic upheaval. It calls for steady correction, patience, and people who stay engaged beyond a single news cycle. The most lasting reforms in American history were not achieved in a day. They develop through sustained effort, civic engagement, and lawful process. When reform respects constitutional order, it strengthens rather than destabilizes. A healthy republic relies on cultural strength as much as on institutional design. Families that teach responsibility, communities that model respect, schools that emphasize civic understanding, and workplaces that uphold fairness all contribute to national resilience. Civic education prepares people to evaluate information rather than accept it uncritically. Honest dialogue replaces suspicion when people communicate directly rather than through distorted channels. Culture and law reinforce each other, and when both are strong, liberty endures. The nation's economic life must reflect balance. Work should carry dignity, effort should be rewarded, and opportunity should remain accessible. Stability for families strengthens stability for institutions. When people feel secure in their ability to build a future, they invest more confidently in their communities. Confidence supports growth, growth encourages reform, and reform protects freedom. The same principle applies to technological progress. Innovation must stay within limits that protect individual rights. Transparency in digital systems, clear data protection standards, and accountability in artificial intelligence help ensure that advances benefit the public. People who stay informed about technological changes help defend liberty in the modern era. Vigilance doesn't mean being hostile to innovation. It means understanding how systems impact daily life. Unity remains the cornerstone of renewal. It does not require identical beliefs. It requires recognition that people share the same constitutional foundation. The nation is strong enough to tolerate disagreement, provided it operates based on mutual respect. When people treat one another as permanent adversaries, institutions weaken. When they view one another as partners in self-government, institutions grow stronger. The road ahead will require debate, refinement, and adjustment. That process is not a sign of instability, but of strength. A republic capable of examining itself honestly demonstrates resilience. Structural reform, improved transparency, fiscal discipline, institutional stability, and lawful modernization are tools for preservation, not a change in identity. The American system endures because it adapts without abandoning its core principles. The responsibility for this adaptation does not rest solely on elected officials. It rests with the people who initially grant authority. People can demand accountability, reward integrity, and correct imbalances. When they use that power consistently and peacefully, change occurs. History shows that ongoing civic participation influences the future more reliably than sudden unrest. As this moment unfolds, the question is not whether the nation faces challenges. It clearly does. The question is whether people will respond with maturity and unity. Renewal rooted in clarity and patience strengthens the republic. Renewal fueled by resentment risks further division. The choice now lies with the people. The next chapter of this country will be written not only in headlines, but also in classrooms, workplaces, neighborhoods, and voting booths. It will be shaped by the expectations people set and the standards they uphold. It will be written in whether unity prevails over division and whether responsibility outweighs indifference. The path we choose together will decide if the republic simply exists or becomes stronger. The American people have always shown resilience. The American flag continues to symbolize freedom, and its colors do not run. Our nation does not retreat, surrender, or back down from challenges. However, for America to form a more perfect union, it must first come together as one. The road ahead is not paved. It will not be easy. The road we are on is paved, and many people will not want to take the hard one. The road ahead is not clear. We cannot see what our destiny will be. Faith in God will guide us forward, and together there is nothing we cannot endure. Our strength is found not alone, but in unity. The path we choose will not only determine our future, but also the future of all mankind. Epilogue. If you have made it this far, then you have already done something important. You have taken the time to step back and look at the bigger picture. Most people never do. Life moves fast, responsibilities take over, and it becomes easier to focus only on what is directly in front of us. But the system we live under continues to move, whether we pay attention to it or not. Nothing in this book changes anything on its own. Words do not fix government. Understanding does. Once you see how things work, it becomes harder to ignore them. You notice patterns and you start to question things that once felt normal. You begin to see that many of the problems we face are not isolated. They are connected, and when they are, they can be changed. The responsibility does not fall on one person, one political party, or one election. It falls on all of us in the small decisions we make every day. What we support, what we ignore, who we vote for, and what we accept. There will always be differences in this country. Different opinions, different beliefs, different priorities. That has always been true, and it always will be. But the strength of this country has never come from everyone thinking the same. It comes from people recognizing what they share. We all live under the same system. We all feel the same pressures. We all want stability, fairness, and opportunity. That is where unity begins. This is not about going backward. It is about correcting directions. It is about bringing things back into balance. The system does not need to be torn down. It needs to be understood, maintained, and restored where necessary. That is how our government was designed. The American experiment has lasted this long because it allows for correction. But correction only happens when people stay involved, pay attention, and take responsibility for what belongs to them. And this government belongs to the people. That has never changed. The question now is simple. What will we do with that responsibility? Because the future of this nation will not be decided by what is written in this book. It will be decided by what people choose to do after they close it. That choice is still ours, and it always will be. A message from the author. There was a time when being an American meant more than choosing sides. It meant standing for something greater than politics. It meant fighting for freedom, not only in America, but around the world. It meant taking responsibility and showing respect for one another. Today, that meaning is harder to find, as division replaces unity and labels replace identity. But the foundation of this country has not changed, even though people see one another as opponents rather than as fellow Americans. People often ask me if I am a Democrat or a Republican. I always answer the same. I am not a Democrat or a Republican. I am an American. This is not the United States of Democrats or Republicans. This is the United States of America. I stand for right over wrong, truth over lies, and good over evil. I believe that everyone should be treated equally, rich or poor, black or white, male or female. Everyone should do their part as an American. The rich are not exempt because they have money and privileges. The poor are not exempt because they cannot afford to help. Everyone must do their part. Laws must be written for everyone, not for one or the other. Equal rights, equal protection, and equal responsibility. We must put our differences aside and work together as one nation, one voice. United we stand, divided we fall. Ask not what your government can do for you. Ask yourself what you can do to help the American experiment of self-government. We are all the children of God. We are all family and the children of liberty. If Jesus were here with us today, he would not be a Democrat or a Republican. Jesus would not choose one side or another. Jesus would stand with all the people. We can use his words as an example of what he would say. He would remind us of what truly matters. He would say, love your neighbor as yourself, Matthew 22:39, and do to others as you would have them do to you, Luke 6:31, bringing the focus back to how people treat one another in everyday life. He would call for mercy instead of judgment, saying, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone." John 8:7. And forgive, and you will be forgiven. Luke 6:37. His message would not be complicated but clear and direct, that people must live with compassion, understanding, and humility if they expect a better future. He would also remind us where our priorities should be, warning, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Matthew 6:21. And repeating, "It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God." Matthew 19:24. He would lift up those often overlooked, saying, "Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Matthew 25:40. And would challenge both leaders and individuals with, "Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant." Matthew 20:26. He would bring the message back to truth and responsibility, reminding all people, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." John 8:32. Thank you for your time. I appreciate your attention in listening to this work. The words you have heard are not meant to end here. They are meant to be carried forward, thought about, and lived out in everyday life. Truth, responsibility, and the value of every person are not ideas for a moment, but principles that must guide us moving forward. What happens next is not decided by a book, but by the people who hear it. Respectfully, David Allen. Connect with author David Allen. Declarationof2026.com or www.davidallenbooks.com. Copyright filed case number 1151347188841. Copyright 2026 by David Allen. All rights reserved. No part of this audiobook may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means, including photocopying, recording, or electronic or mechanical methods, without the prior written permission of the publisher, except in the case of brief quotations embodied in critical reviews and certain other non-commercial uses permitted by copyright law. Published in the United States of America. ISBN 979-8-9951631-7-6.